In the lingering hush of dawn, Daenerys Targaryen opened her eyes to the faint suggestion of light creeping into her silk-draped tent. The sands outside were cold from the night's breath, and though she could sense the approaching sunrise, the warmth of day had yet to banish the chill. She lay still, listening to her own measured breathing and the gentle flap of canvas as a subtle breeze toyed with the edges of her temporary shelter. The remnants of sleep tugged at her, urging her to doze a little longer. But her mind refused the comfort of slumber. There was a promise in the air, an unspoken beckoning that tugged at her spirit, and it would not let her rest. She rose carefully, taking care not to disturb the woven rugs and cushions that made up her small nest of comfort. She ran her hands over her arms, feeling the tiny gooseflesh beneath her palms. She traced a fingertip along the bruise of memory. She could still recall the nights in cold stone passages and warm grass seas, the nights of hunger and fear, and all those times she had found strength she never knew lay within. The air was thinner here, the wind sharper. She let out a slow breath, slid her feet into soft slippers, and parted the tent flaps just enough to peer into the pale glow. Outside, the world was shifting from silver-blue darkness into a faint pink and gold light. Through half-lidded eyes, she saw a sprawling campsite that lay hushed under the dawn sky. A few unsullied stood guard, unmoving as statues. Farther out, tethered horses stamped at the sand, eager for daybreak themselves. She stepped out, and the first crisp breath of morning stung her cheeks. With a measured pace, she began to walk the perimeter of her camp. Each step felt like an unspoken prayer to what had come before and what was yet to be. Her dragons, 3 living wonders, were still at rest somewhere beyond the ring of guards. She could feel them even if she couldn't see them, for their presence had woven itself into her awareness. Drogon, Rhaegal, and Viserion were essential pieces of her heart. She always rose thinking of them, wondering if they had been fed, if they had found warmth in the night. But this morning, her thoughts drifted to something else. Ever since setting foot upon these lands that claimed to be older than many of the gnome kingdoms, she had felt a stir in the back of her mind, a distant calling that she could not name or place. It felt like the faint memory of a dream, or a half-forgotten voice whispering a single word. A few of her most loyal handmaids soon noticed she was awake and began preparing water for her. Steam rose from the kettle when they carried it to a private corner behind her tent so she could wash. She thanked them quietly, her voice still husky from sleep. The water's warmth traveled across her skin, rousing her from her drowsiness. She thought about the day's tasks: scouting, meeting with the local guides, continuing her journey westward. And still, that tiny thread of an echo in her thoughts tugged, urging her to go beyond the day's plan. Before she could delve too deeply into her pondering, she heard the soft crunch of sand behind her and turned to see Jorah Mormont. He stood with that familiar, ever-watchful gaze, respectful but warm. He greeted her with a polite bow, and she tilted her head in acknowledgement. In the growing light, she noticed how the hollows beneath his eyes spoke of a night with little rest, but he made no complaint as he always did. A man of unwavering devotion. "Khaleesi," he said in his low voice, almost inaudible over the gentle rustle of the wind. "The guide we employed, Darren, claims to have spotted something to the west last evening." "A glimmer," he said, though he couldn't be certain what it was. "He asked to speak with you as soon as possible." She nodded. "I will see him. Let him wait near the horses." "Niall." Jorah placed his fist over his chest, murmuring another honorific, and withdrew Baut Yuam. Daenerys took a moment longer to collect her thoughts, finishing her quiet ablutions. She rinsed the last bit of dust from her feet, dried off, and let her handmaids help her into a soft tunic of pale blue. She tied her hair back into a braid, leaving a few silver blonde tendrils around her face to sway freely. Something about the desert called for a simpler style. She affixed a modest pair of sandals, then straightened her posture, letting her shoulders bear the weight of her station. The morning sun was growing stronger, and the desert was no place to linger in idleness. Outside her tent, she found Darren already waiting. He was a young man of swarthy complexion, clad in patched trousers and a dusty cloak. His eyes flicked upward, betraying both awe and intimidation at the sight of the Mother of Dragons. Though her guards were sparse, The image of her silver hair and the early light, combined with her regal bearing, often made strangers stammer. Yet Darren's excitement overrode his hesitation, and his words came tumbling forth as he tried to bow. "Your Grace," he began awkwardly, "I didn't mean to disturb your rest. Well, last night, I was out near the dunes, searching for any sign of water or a better path. That's when I saw a spark of something. Something that didn't look like ordinary rock. Might have been buried. Could be a precious stone, or maybe just a reflection from a tarnished piece of metal. But it was bright enough to catch my eye. I've never seen any stone shine like that in moonlight." Mindabanan. She considered his words. The desert was known for its illusions. Moonlight could sparkle on crystals, or the reflection of starlight on pale rock might seem like a beacon to a tired eye. Yet something in the guide's tone gave her pause. He seemed genuine in his belief that what he saw was unlike anything else, and that faint stirring within her quickened, as though rising to meet the possibility of discovery. "Show me," she said simply. She did not waste time with further questions. She took her place at the lead of her small retinue. A handful of unsullied Jorah and a few other trusted companions, and under Darren's direction, they set out toward the western dunes. The sun advanced in the sky, gradually turning from pinkish gold to a fiercer yellow-white. The grains of sand sparkled. Each dune rose and fell like an undulating wave, concealing unknown terrain on the far side. Daenerys noticed the dryness creeping into her lips, felt the warmth pressing on her skin, but she pressed on without complaint. She trusted her body, remembered the days of riding with the Dothraki Khalasar, the unrelenting sun on her shoulders, and the fierce pride in her heart. She was not a woman to be bowed by a mere desert. Her gaze flicked to Jorah from time to time. He wore a look of concentration, scanning the horizon for threats or signs of life. But the desert was silent. No tracks, no caravans passing by. Only them. Ahead, Darren walked with a certain purpose, occasionally pausing to adjust his course. He tried to follow the memory of whatever vantage had granted him a glimpse of that mysterious glimmer. As they crested a particularly tall dune, the group paused for breath. Daenerys gazed across a wide expanse beneath her. The wind had carved lines along the sand. The deeper ridges cast shadows even as the sun grew higher. A part of her wondered if this was folly, if she was chasing a mere reflection of moonlight. Yet she continued. Something in her heart insisted that she keep moving. Darren led them to a spot where the sand had a darker hue. He knelt, running his hand over the surface. A hush fell over everyone as they watched him brush aside loose grit. And there it was, a faint gleam, like the eye of a half-buried jewel. Daenerys felt an inexplicable surge of energy rush through her. The sensation was not entirely foreign. It was almost akin to the feeling she'd had when she had first laid eyes on the petrified dragon eggs that would one day hatch into her beloved creatures. She descended from her vantage point, stepping carefully so she would not lose balance on the shifting sands. When she stood beside Darren, she knelt as well, ignoring the prickling heat. She reached out, and her fingertips grazed something smooth. She brushed more sand away. The object's surface was cool despite the warming morning. Bits of caked dirt clung to its curved face, but the color beneath looked like a swirl of midnight blues shot through with faint silver streaks. She felt its shape, the gentle slope, the telltale weight. She froze. Her heart hammered in her chest. This was no ordinary stone, no mere deposit of mineral. She knew the texture in an instant, recognized the pattern. It felt like the eggs she had once been given as a wedding gift, though that gift had been petrified. Fossils of once living wonders. This object still felt ancient, yes, but somehow more. It seemed to hold a hush of potential, and in that moment, it felt as if the entire world stilled. The wind dying in place, the sun ceasing to move across the sky, waiting for her to acknowledge this impossible discovery. Her voice trembled with quiet astonishment. "It's a dragon egg." The words made the small group around her draw in sharp breaths. The Unsullied were stoic, but even they exchanged glances. Jorah, too, looked caught between amazement and concern. His brow furrowed as he scanned the horizon again, as if expecting some threat to arise. Daenerys, with the desert sun bearing down on her back, slowly extracted the oval form from the sand. The color seemed to shift subtly as she moved it, the surface catching the sunlight in a way that played tricks on her eyes. She cradled it carefully, brushing the last of the grit from its scaled exterior. Unlike the petrified eggs she had known, which were locked in stony dormancy, this one felt, for lack of a better word, alive. It exuded a subtle warmth, or perhaps that was her own body heat reflecting back. No. She sensed something else. A faint hum in the air, an echo of the magic that ran through the blood of the dragon. A sense of hush fell upon them, as if they stood within a sacred circle. At last, Jorah cleared his throat. "Your Grace," he said softly, but his voice was tinged with wonder. "Another egg. Could it truly be?" She nodded, still in quiet disbelief. "We found it here, abandoned in the sand, or hidden. Who could have placed it here?" She pressed her lips together, half-formed thoughts swirling within her. The first eggs had been from the Shadowlands beyond Ashai, gifted to her as petrified relics. But this one, it appeared far less dormant. She didn't understand how it was possible, but she remembered the words of lore. That dragon eggs could sometimes appear where Targaryen blood ran strong, as if drawn to that which might awaken them. Or perhaps some other force had brought it here. However it had come to lie beneath these sands, it was now in her hands. Daeron, standing awkwardly at her side, scratched his head. He didn't seem to comprehend the full gravity, only that he had found something beyond priceless. "What do you want me to do, Your Grace?" She realized she should reward him, but at the moment, her mind churned with too many questions. "We will speak later," she told him gently. "For now, you have my gratitude. You may return to camp." She glanced at Jorah. "We will bring this back, carefully." Jorah understood at once, gesturing for a few unsullied to help clear a way for her as they carried the egg. Though the egg was not enormous, it was a burden of immense care. Daenerys found it heavier than expected, but not unwieldy. She pressed it close to her chest. She felt an unnameable stir within, akin to the moment she had first discovered she was the mother of dragons after stepping from Drogo's funeral pyre alive. In that instant, she sensed a bond, tenuous but real, as if this egg recognized her presence. Could it be that it was meant for her, like the others? Their return journey was as silent as it was swift. The desert heat bore down on them, making each step more exhausting. But she scarcely noticed. Her thoughts reeled with possibilities. Another dragon egg? Could it hatch? Would it respond to the same conditions that had awakened her three? She recalled the violent storm of fire and blood that had coaxed Drogon, Rhaegal, and Viserion into the world. Did this one require the same catalyst, and if so, was she capable of summoning that crucible of magic once again? Back at the camp, she withdrew into her tent with Jorah, Grey Worm, Missandei, who had hurried over, curious about what her queen bore, and a few of her closest confidants. Daeron waited outside, uncertain of his place. Inside, Daenerys laid the egg upon a soft cushion. Its scales caught the lamplight, shimmering with that singularly mesmerizing pattern of midnight blue and pale silver. As the lamplight flickered, the egg took on an almost living luster. Missandei exhaled, her eyes wide. "This is remarkable, Your Grace." "Another egg? This is a gift from the gods." Nakbasimsak, Grey Worm, ever practical, asked. "What do you plan to do?" "I do not know," Daenerys admitted, not looking away from the egg. "The first time, my dragons were born of fire and sacrifice. I had no guide. I had only faith. But we are in a desert now, and I do not wish to gamble with another funeral pyre." She felt the tremor of memory of the day she walked into the flames. She had emerged unburnt, but not unchanged. She had lost much to gain her dragons. She would not repeat those events lightly. Jorah crossed his arms, brow knitted in concentration. "If this egg is truly alive, it must be kept warm. You remember how you once kept your eggs near fire. Is there a way to replicate that environment without the blood magic from Drogo's pyre?" Daenerys pursed her lips. "I could keep it in a brazier as I once did. But I feel—" She paused, trying to gather the intangible sense of knowing that welled within her. "This egg is different. My other eggs were dormant for centuries. This one, perhaps it has not turned to stone. Perhaps it has never fully lost its promise of life." She found herself pressing a palm gently against the shell. An odd calm came over her. She heard the soft crackle of the tent cloth and the breeze, the hushed breath of those around her. She imagined she felt a faint pulse answering her own heartbeat. She stayed like that for a long moment, not speaking, just breathing. Time seemed suspended. At last, she drew her hand back and looked to her companions. "We will carry it with us, keep it close to warmth. And if the time comes for it to hatch, I will know. I cannot say how or when, but I will know." She forced a small smile, though her eyes shone with fervor. "For now, let it remain a secret. The world does not need to know we have found another egg." Then de Setter. All present agreed, for the idea of another dragon might spark hope or fear in too many hearts, depending on who heard the news. With that, she began to make arrangements. A small chest, lined with thick cloth, was brought in. The chest itself was not ornate, but sturdy, and with a bit of improvisation, they rigged a means to keep the egg near a constant source of moderate heat. Some coals laid beneath a metal tray inside the chest, carefully watched, renewed regularly so as not to scorch the egg or allow it to cool too much. It was rudimentary, but it would have to suffice on their journey. The remainder of the day passed in a slow swirl of responsibilities. She met with Darren once more, gifting him with coin and ensuring his loyalty. He seemed content, even bragging that he might have discovered the key to reshaping history. Daenerys gently cautioned him to remain silent on that matter. His life, and the lives of many, could depend on discretion. As the sun reached its zenith, the heat became stifling. They all sought what shade they could, the camels and horses growing restless. Daenerys remained near her tent, drawn repeatedly to check on the egg, to run her hand along its ridged surface. Each time she did, she felt a quickening within her blood. Her heart told her that something incredible was in motion. Something that might well change the course of her destiny once again. All the while, she had a peculiar thought. There was something about this egg that felt different. Not just because it was a new color, but because she felt no immediate sense that it was hers. Drogon, Rhaegal, and Viserion had always seemed bonded to her. She had given them life from the moment of their hatching, and she was the first living person they saw. But this one, if it hatched, whose dragon would it be? She suspected it might not be hers to command. Still, she would nurture it and protect it. Dragons were family, and she would never abandon it to the desert. When evening fell, the campfires glowed in circles around the tents, and the desert's temperature dipped swiftly from scorching to biting cold. Daenerys, swathed in a thick cloak, emerged to share a quiet meal with her counselors. A hush seemed to cling to the night air, as if the sands themselves had no answer for the day's mysteries. The egg's presence in the chest was like a silent star, drawing her mind and heart. She imagined she could see it, shimmering behind her closed eyes. She ate slowly, nibbling at roasted goat and flatbread. The dryness of her mouth was only partially relieved by sips of water. Her appetite was low. Jorah watched her with discreet concern. She offered him a reassuring nod, knowing that if he wished to inquire about her mood, he would do so privately. For now, they kept their conversation to the mundane needs of travel. Water supplies, vantage points, possible routes toward the next outpost. But all the while, Daenerys' mind strayed. When at last the meal was done and the remains cleared away, she bid her companions good night and returned to the tent. Almost immediately, she lifted the lid of the chest. A gentle wave of warmth drifted out, bearing a faint tang of coals. She glimpsed the egg's surface, saw how it shimmered even in the low light from the single brazier inside the tent. She ran her fingertips over the scales, feeling each ridge. She pondered lighting more coals, intensifying the heat, but decided caution was wiser. She did not know how ready the egg was, or if the time was right to push it toward hatching. She only knew she had to protect it. She settled onto her bedding, the egg in its chest near enough, that she could easily reach over and touch it if she wished. That strange sense of watchfulness thrummed through her. She felt as though she were being observed by an unborn presence. Though it was not threatening in the least, it was undeniably potent. She could not remember feeling quite this way with her original three, but it might simply be that so much had been different then. Her world had been cloaked in sorrow and desperation, and her transformation in Drogo's funeral pyre had overshadowed subtler sensations. She closed her eyes, listening to the desert wind drifting across the dunes. In her half-dreaming state, she imagined the swirling patterns of silver and blue dancing on the shell. She pictured a hatchling stirring within, a small midnight-hued creature with glimmering membranes for wings. She dreamed of soft squeaks, the chirps of a young dragon discovering life. Then, unbidden, another image stole into her reverie. A figure cloaked in black fur, standing at the edge of a snowy forest. A man with a solemn face, dark hair, and gray eyes that saw too deeply. Jon Snow. The thought of him stirred an emotion deep in her chest. She recalled the quiet gravitas he carried, the unwavering sense of duty. She remembered how the air felt around him, frigid at times, like the winds of the north, but warmed by the steady embers of his heart. She let the image fade, uncertain why he had come to her thoughts in that moment. Night drew on, and at some point, the exhaustion of the journey and the day's excitement overcame her. She slipped into sleep, vaguely aware of the constant presence of the egg, an unseen sentinel of possibility. Morning arrived in a blaze of early light. Daenerys rose, stretched, and performed her usual routine before checking on the egg again. The coals had cooled to a dull glow, but the interior of the chest remained faintly warm. The egg's colors were still as vivid, and when she laid a palm against it, she thought the shell felt ever so slightly warmer than it had the night before. She told herself it was likely just the lingering heat from the coals, but a small part of her whispered that the egg might be stirring. She emerged from the tent to find the day's tasks already underway. Missandei was directing a few of the Unsullied to pack up supplies. Yora stood near the horses, speaking with one of the riders about the best route out of the dunes. They had a long journey ahead of them if they intended to find suitable farmland, water sources, or settlement that could support their company. They set off an hour later, the sun creeping above the dunes with a promise of scorching heat. Daenerys rode a sturdy mare with light step, chosen for its resilience to desert travel. The chest containing the egg was placed with great care on a baggage horse, strapped securely so it wouldn't jostle. Yora rode close to it, occasionally glancing back, ensuring no harm befell it. Daenerys too found her eyes drawn to it every time the trail curved or the dunes dipped. The hours passed in a slow, methodical trek across the sea of sand. The wind changed direction around midday, swirling dust devils that teased the edges of their caravan. Daenerys kept her face partially covered with a light scarf to guard against the stinging sand. Still, grit clung to her lips, and the dryness made her thirst unquenchable. They stopped twice to let the horses drink, rationing water carefully. She considered how precarious a place the desert was for a large company, and how they would not be able to linger here indefinitely. By mid-afternoon, the scorching sun had driven them to seek shelter at the base of a tall dune that provided at least partial shade. It was there, while the horses panted and men sipped from flasks, that Daenerys felt compelled to check on the egg once more. She dismounted, ignoring her own fatigue, and hurried to the chest. Lifting the lid, she was greeted by a wave of heat. The coals had been replenished before they left, and they were still warm. The egg sat exactly as before. Yet the swirl of silver and blue on its shell appeared more vivid. She wasn't entirely certain. She brushed the back of her hand across her brow, realizing how the desert heat could play tricks on her eyes, and that reflection might be illusions in the swirl of color. She reached inside, gingerly resting her hand atop the shell. She almost withdrew in surprise when she felt a distinct flutter, a ripple of energy that traveled up her arm. It was as if something within had shifted, pressed back against her. She peered closer, heart racing. This was no trick of the mind. The egg had stirred. She could not say if it was merely expanding in the heat, or if a creature within it had truly moved. But in that moment, she had no doubt that it lived. She glanced about, eager for a witness. Yora was still with the others, discussing the route ahead, and she realized she wanted to keep this moment to herself a little longer. Carefully, she covered the egg again, shutting the chest. She felt an irrational protectiveness rising. This was her discovery. Perhaps it was selfish, but she wanted to guard the egg's secrets until she understood them better. The evening's journey was subdued. They traveled a few more hours to a place where the dunes leveled out. According to the locals, there should be a small oasis just another half-day's ride west, and they hoped to reach it by morning. Daenerys' mind drifted as she rode. She found herself thinking again of Jon Snow, and the strangeness of that recollection. Why him? What chord did he strike in her that could be connected to the egg's presence? She knew well the tale of his parentage, how he was of Targaryen blood, the son of her eldest brother, Rhaegar Targaryen. She remembered the swirl of emotion upon learning that truth. She had believed herself the sole surviving Targaryen in the world, and then came this revelation that changed so many things. Could it be that this egg, nestled within the desert, had something to do with that lineage? A whimsical thought, perhaps. Yet, was it so impossible? The magic surrounding dragons was not straightforward or simple. Perhaps it had slumbered here for decades, centuries, waiting for another Targaryen to sense it. And maybe it was bound not to her alone, but to the other living scion of her house. The night fell, and the entire camp stilled once more. The hush of a star-filled sky settled over them. Sometimes Daenerys missed the hustle of great cities, the shimmer of torches and lamplight across stone squares, but there was an ethereal beauty in the desert's quiet, a timelessness that reminded her how vast the world could be. Wrapped in her cloak, she ventured away from the tents to a nearby rise. The moon's pale glow illuminated the sand to a ghostly hue. She listened to her own footsteps, the faint crunch they made. She felt the dryness catch at her throat. She gazed up at the silver disk above, feeling its cool radiance on her face. She thought of dragons, of destiny, and of a future she had not yet shaped. The egg's existence changed so much. Another dragon would mean another measure of strength, but also another responsibility. Dragons were not mere weapons. They were living creatures, creatures of magic and cunning. She felt pride at the prospect of raising one more, but also a tremor of uncertainty. Would she be enough to guide and teach yet another child of flame and scale? She closed her eyes, letting the desert wind brush her cheek, and in that quiet moment, she felt it again, that intangible presence calling her, whispering in the depths of her mind. It was not the voice of her dragons or of her ancestors. It was something new, or perhaps someone. She had no name for it, no words, only that sense of a link forming, or a path opening. She stood there for a long time, letting the night pass. The camp would wait for her. Tomorrow, she would wake and carry on the journey. But for now, she listened to the desert's silence and her own heart's uncertain music. At length, she returned to her tent, pausing first to stand guard over the egg in its chest. She crouched beside it, lifting the lid just enough to peer in. The coals glowed faintly. The egg seemed to emanate a subtler glow of its own. She placed her hand there again, letting her imagination drift. She envisioned a time when the egg might hatch, revealing a small head and bright eyes, a squeaking new life. Would it look to her as its mother, or might it forge a bond with another? Daenerys could not say. She only knew she would protect it, even if it was not meant to be hers. A mother of dragons protected all dragons, did she not? She leaned forward and pressed her lips gently to the shell. The surface felt oddly warm beneath her kiss. Then she closed the chest once more, blew out the lamp, and settled onto her bedding. Her thoughts lingered in that liminal space between wonder and concern, slipping into dreams wrought by starlight and the deep echo of dragonfire. Morning came too soon. The desert was relentless, the temperature dropping drastically at night, then surging again by day. Her men packed up the camp quickly, eager to reach the oasis. She retrieved the egg, transferring it carefully from the chest, to check its surface for cracks or changes. It looked the same, but she sensed its hidden potential, thrumming quietly beneath the scales. She replaced it with reverence, giving strict orders to keep the coals going, but not to overheat it. They set off again. This time, Daenerys rode with an undercurrent of anticipation. She scarcely noticed the dryness of her lips or the ache in her thighs from so many hours on horseback. Her mind was fixed on the egg. Beneath her gentle demeanor, the thought of what might come kept her pulse quickened. Even the vast emptiness of the desert could not quell her sense of purpose. In her chest, she carried that feeling of quiet marvel, an internal flame of hope. At last, sometime around midday, they spotted a shimmering line in the distance. As they drew closer, they beheld a scattering of palm trees, a small pool of water, and a few outcroppings of lush plants. A true oasis. Relief swept through the group. Their horses whinnied with renewed vigor, and soon they trotted into the cooling shade of the palms. A breeze rippled across the water's surface. The men cheered softly, grateful for the respite. Daenerys dismounted and immediately turned to the baggage horse. She could see the chest there, jostled perhaps, but apparently intact. She felt an odd urgency. She walked over and undid the straps, breathing in the scent of the oasis, a fragrance of green leaves and water lilies, mingled with the heavier musk of damp earth. But her hands trembled with the need to see the egg. Carefully, she opened the chest. The heat inside billowed out, and she saw that the egg had shifted slightly, probably due to the horse's uneven gait. She adjusted it gently and noticed a faint glisten of moisture along one of the ridges. She couldn't say if it was from condensation or sweat from the shell. She brushed her thumb over it. A flicker ran through her, like a spark leaping from the egg to her flesh. She swallowed, ears roaring with a rush of blood. Then she closed the lid, composing herself. Jorah appeared at her side. "Khaleesi," he said gently, using the old title by habit. "Is everything well?" She nodded, forcing a calm smile. "Everything is fine. Let's let the men rest, see to the horses, and ensure we have enough water supplies. We'll stay here a night, and keep an eye out for visitors. This oasis may be used by travelers or merchants." He inclined his head. "As you command." He left to organize the watch. Daenerys lingered for another moment, before slipping away, seeking a private nook. The oasis offered several discreet hideaways among the thick palm trunks and hanging vines. She found a spot by the water's edge, where a tree root formed a natural seat. There, she removed her boots and let her feet dip into the pool. The cool water soothed her throbbing ankles. She breathed in relief, exhaling tension she had not realized she carried. In the reflection of the water, she saw herself. Silver hair braided back, a faint flush on her cheeks from travel. She looked older than the girl who had once been sold to Khal Drogo. She had become a queen, a conqueror, and yet she was still searching. For peace, for a home, for the realization of her destiny. A ripple passed across the water as a fish darted near her foot. She smiled faintly, then closed her eyes, trying to center her thoughts. There was no hurry, she told herself. She would know what to do about the egg in time. For now, rest was warranted. She leaned her head back against the trunk, letting the faint breeze ruffle the ends of her hair. She listened to the rustle of palm fronds overhead, the gentle trickle of water along the edge of the pool. Minutes stretched into an hour. The camp behind her bustled quietly. Unsullied placing tents, Missandei organizing provisions. Darren, no doubt boasting about the discovery, had helped uncover. But no one disturbed her. Eventually, the dryness in her mouth reminded her to take a canteen, and she drank deeply, feeling the water flow into her body like life returning to parched soil. When she finally rose and returned to the group, she found that the tents had been set in a small clearing. The baggage horse carrying the egg had been led to the shade, and two Unsullied stood guard. She nodded in approval. Jorah briefed her on the watch schedule, the water they would gather, and that they had posted men on the outskirts, in case any merchants or brigands approached. She agreed with all, trusting his judgment. She paused just once to glance at the chest, half hidden behind sacks of grain, and then forced herself to turn away. She knew it was under good care. As the sun began its descent toward the horizon, the oasis took on a golden hue. The palm fronds overhead glistened, and the pool mirrored the sky in molten shades of orange and pink. The men lit small fires in a circle, preparing for an evening of rest. A sense of fragile peace settled over the camp. And yet, in Daenerys' heart, the egg's presence loomed like a star drawing her gaze. She could not ignore the stirring sense that the future was shifting beneath her feet. There was a new player in this grand tapestry, an unborn dragon that might alter alliances and fates. She had no knowledge that far to the north, in a land of ice and stone, Jon Snow was also gazing into the distance, thinking of dragons and Targaryen blood. Nor did she know that forces beyond her sight conspired to bring their stories together again. All she knew was that she could feel a question echoing through her spirit. Was this egg truly hers to bring forth, or did it belong to another? The old songs told of dragons bonded to riders, but how those bonds formed was seldom predictable. She could only follow the path laid before her, guided by her instincts and the flickering hints of prophecy. The night advanced, and she found herself alone at last, tending to the egg in her tent. She had set up a brazier near the chest, fueling it with carefully measured coals. She sat cross-legged, the chest open before her, the egg resting inside, absorbing the heat. By the flickering light of the flames, she studied every curve and scale, memorizing the patterns. She spoke softly to it, just as she had once done with her first eggs, telling it stories of her journey, of dragons that soared over armies, of the cities she had freed, the heartbreaks she had endured, and the triumphs she had yet to achieve. The egg offered no reply, but she felt less alone for speaking. Time slipped by, the flames crackling softly. Eventually, the weariness of the day pressed down on her. She reached out and lifted the egg from the chest, cradling it in her arms. It was warm, almost too hot to hold. She grimaced slightly but refused to let go. Slowly, she placed it on her lap, letting a layer of cloth protect her legs. She kept one hand upon its surface, stroking gently. With the other hand, she fed small bits of wood into the brazier. The tent glowed with an intimate orange light. In that dance of shadows, she closed her eyes, lulled by the popping embers. She felt the egg's presence in her arms as a steady pulse. She imagined the creature inside, coiled in potential, waiting for the moment of awakening. And, unbidden, she pictured again that image of Jon Snow. She saw him in furs, breath steaming in winter air, that resolute expression on his face. She recalled the warmth of him pressed close in another life, in a moment stolen from war and worry. Something about that memory blended with the warmth of the egg, leaving her with a subdued ache in her chest. It was as though the egg was reminding her of a truth that lay just beyond her understanding. Eventually, she lowered the egg back into the chest, covering it gently. The metal walls reverberated with the soft thrum of heat. She whispered a final wish for its safekeeping, then lay down on her bedding. She let her eyes drift shut. Once more, she dreamed of dragons in flight, of a midnight serpent with silver-tipped wings, gliding across a sky that belonged to no one and everyone all at once. She dreamed of a tall figure standing beneath it, holding out a hand as if to beckon the dragon down. And so the night passed, quietly, in the hush of the desert oasis. The egg remained unhatched, its secrets locked within, yet Daenerys knew that fate had a way of revealing itself in its own time. She lay there, unknowing of how events might unfold, only certain that she had found something impossible and wonderful. Another dragon, another chance at forging the future. The world outside her tent slept in silence, but within her heart, a new flame had been lit. A flame that would guide her onward, for good or ill, until the end. The morning light stole gently over the palm fronds, turning them from dark silhouettes into a vibrant green that shimmered above the oasis pool. Though the desert winds had blown through the night, creating a restless hush around her tent, Daenerys had slept deeper than she would have guessed. She did not recall waking in the early hours, only sinking further into a half-dream where she roamed the dunes with a dragon's shadow at her side. When she opened her eyes, the sense of that presence was gone, replaced by the soft golden glow of daybreak and the warmth of stagnant coals in the brazier. She rose at once, aware of a tingling anticipation. Her first thoughts went to the egg. Barefoot, she moved across her tent, parted the flaps that separated the sleeping area from the makeshift space where the chest lay. The air around it was still faintly warm, and a single unsullied guard stood by the entrance, silent as a sentry carved from stone. Daenerys offered him a nod of acknowledgement before crouching beside the chest, her hands a little unsteady as she lifted the lid. She had expected the interior to be cool by now. It had been hours since she last fed the coals. Yet a surprising heat coursed out, rolling against her cheeks and making her inhale sharply. The egg appeared as she had left it, nestled atop soft wrappings, its surface a midnight tapestry of swirling colors that gleamed with silver accents. But the lines of silver somehow looked more pronounced, as though they had brightened in the night. She ran the back of her hand across the shell, feeling a definite warmth that went beyond leftover coals. It was as though some hidden fire breathed within. She closed her eyes and let the sensation travel through her flesh, stirring her blood. Rising, she signaled for fresh coals to be heated outside, giving instructions to maintain only a moderate warmth. She still felt reluctant to push the egg toward a hatching she did not fully comprehend. She wanted to learn more, to sense when the time was right, if it ever would be. Though her first 3 dragons had been given life through a miraculous ceremony of fire and blood, she had no intention of repeating that savage spectacle. And this egg, this one felt strangely different, as though waiting for something far more measured. Before long, a handful of her most loyal servants entered with trays of smoldering coals. They worked methodically, spreading them beneath the metal shelf on which the egg rested. When they finished, the chest glowed from inside, and the heat radiated outward. Daenerys dismissed the servants with quiet gratitude, then lingered for a moment, as if to confirm that the egg was content. Its presence tugged at her, and she found herself whispering an unspoken wish for it to remain still, uncracked, until they reached safer ground. She did not want this fragile, half-formed life appearing in the midst of a desolate desert. Stepping out from the tent, she let the warm air of the oasis envelop her. The smells of fresh water and damp earth mingled with the dryness of shifting sand. Tall palms swayed lazily overhead, casting broken shadows on the ground. The rest of the camp stirred as well, unsullied, bending down to fill water skins, Missandei quietly conversing with a pair of scouts, and Jorah Mormont standing near the horses, inspecting a hoof for any sign of cracking or injury. Daenerys moved toward Jorah's side, drawn by the sense of normalcy in tending to the animals. "Good morning, Sir Jorah," she said softly, her voice still touched by the remnants of slumber. He turned, a tired smile curving his lips. "Good morning, Khaleesi. How did you sleep?" "Better than I thought I would," she replied, "though I dreamt strange dreams again." He nodded, unspeaking, his expression calm. In the light, she noticed faint smudges beneath his eyes. Likely he had been up late, ensuring the camp's security. They had posted guards around the oasis in case travelers arrived unexpectedly. An oasis could attract everything from wandering merchants to armed bandits. But the night had passed quietly, it seemed. She glanced at the horses and saw they were noticeably more relaxed, having drunk their fill and found sweet grasses growing along the edge of the water. Then she surveyed the camp, noticing Missandei's keen gaze following her. She beckoned Missandei over, and the young woman joined them with a respectful bow of her head. "Any news from our sentries?" Daenerys asked. "None, Your Grace," Missandei answered. "No strangers approached. We heard the distant braying of camels, but they passed north of the oasis, never quite within sight. Perhaps a caravan on a different route." Daenerys digested that with a nod, relieved they would not have to deal with negotiations or potential threats so soon after discovering the egg. She ran a hand through her hair, pushing back a stubborn strand that had escaped her braid. "Then we should plan to leave by midday, once the heat has grown a little less severe," she said, recalling how quickly the desert sun could climb. "We'll load extra water. The next stretch might be harsher." Jorah agreed, adding that it would be wise to rest a second night if needed. But Daenerys shook her head. She felt a restless pull to keep moving. Perhaps it was the egg's influence on her spirit. Or perhaps it was a deeper instinct that told her they couldn't linger too long in anyone's spot. There was a stirring in the world. She could not name it, but she sensed something shifting in the intangible tapestry of fate. Best to keep traveling. They spent the morning hours gathering what supplies the oasis could yield. The water was plentiful, so they filled every available skin, barrel, and flask. The palm trees provided some small harvest of dates, which would serve as rations to supplement their grain and dried meats. All the while, Daenerys kept an eye on the chest, ensuring no harm came to it. Each time the memory of her dream flirted with her mind, visions of a figure in black fur, a swirl of snow and ice, she suppressed a wave of longing. She forced herself to focus on the present moment, on leading her people, on coaxing new life from that mysterious egg. Close to noon, the sun reached a punishing height, but Daenerys decided they could at least pack the camp and prepare for departure. She walked among her company, checking on the men's morale. The Unsullied were as stoic as ever, showing no sign of discomfort, though sweat glistened on their brows. Her Dothraki bloodriders, few though they were in number, remained steady, uncomplaining about the heat. Others, from the new recruits and freedmen who had come to follow her in hopes of a better life, struggled more visibly with thirst and exhaustion. She offered them gentle words of encouragement, urging them to rest in the shade until the procession officially moved. As she made her rounds, she paused to speak with Daeron, the guide who had discovered the egg. He was hunkered near a small cluster of rocks, rummaging in a travel pack. Upon seeing her approach, he stood hastily, trying to compose himself. "Your Grace," he said in a half-bow, "I was just checking some notes. Maps I sketched from local talk. There's a rumor of a narrow canyon to the southwest that might cut our travel time by a day." She studied his face. His eyes glinted with the eagerness of someone longing to prove his worth. She remembered that she hadn't spoken much with him since the discovery. She'd rewarded him but hadn't truly invited him into any council. She was cautious about trusting strangers with precious secrets. Still, she remained polite. "A canyon might be faster, but we must also be wary of ambush or dangers lurking within. Do you believe it's safe enough for our caravan?" He looked away, frowning slightly. "I can't say. The stories differ. Some travelers say it's haunted by desert spirits who wail at night. Others say it's a haven for bandits. But none of them claim to have met a large force there. With your Unsullied guard, perhaps it's nothing we can handle." She considered. A direct route was tempting. Lingering out in the open dunes made them vulnerable to the elements and to roving marauders. But a narrow canyon could be a trap as easily as a shortcut. "We'll keep that in mind," she said gently. "Thank you, Daeron. We'll decide our path after we leave this oasis. For now, ensure you're ready to depart soon." He nodded, chest puffing slightly with importance, and she continued on her way. The labor of striking camp was swift and orderly. By the time the sun had edged slightly past its zenith, the tents were folded, the animals loaded, and the men arrayed for travel. Daenerys oversaw the placement of the chest containing the egg, personally ensuring it was strapped in a manner that minimized any jolts. She arranged for extra cloaks to drape over the wooden lid, hoping to shield it from direct sunlight. Heat upon heat might be too much. At last, the command to move sounded, and the caravan lurched forward. The oasis began to fade behind them, its cluster of palms receding like a mirage in the distance. Daenerys rode near the head of the group, her silver hair secured beneath a light scarf to keep out the worst of the sun's glare. The desert stretched out before them in every direction, an unbroken canvas of ochre and gold. The wind had died down, leaving a stifling stillness that made each breath feel like a warm weight in her lungs. They pressed onward, the crunch of hooves and boots against the sand, the only steady accompaniment to their thoughts. Occasionally, the cry of a bird broke the silence, some lone scavenger drifting on thermals above. Daenerys found her mind drifting to the egg again, and she wondered. If it hatched, would the little dragon adapt to the desert as easily as Drogon and his siblings had taken to the skies of Essos? Would it yearn for cooler climates, for a land of ice and snow? She smiled wryly at that notion. Dragons were creatures of fire, yet the memory of the north tugged at her heart. She remembered the shock of winter, the hush of cold forests, and the pale drift of snow upon the battlements. The afternoon wore on, and the desert showed no mercy. Some of the recruits began to flag, their footsteps dragging. Daenerys called a brief halt for water, watching as each man sipped sparingly from the skins. Another hour passed, and the group spied a small formation of rocks, jutting from the sand like jagged teeth. They decided to shelter there for a short while, letting the horses rest in the shadow. Though the shadow was scarcely large enough for everyone, Daenerys took the opportunity to check the egg once more. She had it brought to her away from the main crowd, only Jorah and Missandei accompanying. The coals in the chest had cooled significantly during the journey, but the desert sun had kept the interior hot. Crouching, Daenerys opened the lid a fraction, letting fresh air sweep inside. Then she placed her hand upon the shell. It radiated warmth as though it contained a slumbering forge. Her breath caught when she felt a subtle vibration, an unmistakable twitch within. She glanced at Jorah and Missandei, her eyes bright. "There is movement," she murmured, heart pounding in her throat. "It's not just the heat expanding the shell. I feel something shifting." Jorah leaned closer, careful not to crowd her. "Are you certain, Khaleesi?" His voice was hushed, a mixture of wonder and guarded concern. She nodded. "I am." Missandei's face glowed with excitement, though she kept her composure. "That means it might hatch soon," she said softly, her gaze darting to Jorah and then back to Daenerys. Daenerys shook her head, uncertain. "I don't know. The last time, it took a funeral pyre to crack the stone shells. But those eggs were centuries old, petrified beyond easy recall. This one..." She traced the silver lines on the shell with her fingertip. "It may be younger, more vital." She shut the lid gently, as though afraid to disturb the life within. A swirl of conflicting emotions coursed through her. Awe, hope, and a deep current of apprehension. How would she guide a new hatchling in these harsh lands? How would her existing dragons, now grown, distant in their own might, react to a new sibling? Would it see her as mother, or would it sense some other calling? She rose and addressed Jorah quietly. "We can't allow this egg to hatch in the middle of nowhere. We need to find a place with safety and resources. At least an enclosure where we can keep it from flying off, or from being attacked while vulnerable." "None." Jorah agreed without hesitation. "We'll search for the best route ahead. Perhaps that canyon Daeron mentioned is, in fact, our best bet. We might find shade, water, or a hidden place to rest longer." Daenerys grimaced, uncertain if stepping into a narrow canyon would truly be wise. But the alternative was to keep wandering in the open desert. She realized that if the egg began to hatch spontaneously, she'd have no recourse but to shelter it under makeshift tents. She would protect the newborn dragon at all costs, but exposure and heat might weaken it at a critical moment. She nodded, glancing at Missandei. "Fetch Daeron. Tell him I wish to consult him about that canyon. We'll decide which route to take." Missandei inclined her head and left. Daenerys and Jorah exchanged a glance. The old knight wore his devotion plainly in the lines of his face, but she also saw the weight of worry. Another dragon brought immeasurable power and opportunity, yet also countless unknowns. The realm was still unsettled. Rival factions, whispers of new alliances. Such a creature might tip the balance of power, or it might incite a fresh wave of fear from those who remembered the destructive potential of dragons. Daeron arrived promptly, wiping sweat from his forehead as he approached. He offered a respectful dip of his head. "Your Grace, you wanted to talk about the canyon?" "Yes," Daenerys said, crossing her arms lightly. "We need to make a choice soon. Are you certain you can find it, and do you believe it will provide us some measure of safety?" "Madernai." He cleared his throat. "I'm fairly sure I can locate it, my queen. The canyon is known as the Whispering Wound, or so some travelers call it. I was told the entrance is marked by a tall rock shaped like a scorpion's tail. If we find that marker, the canyon's mouth lies just beyond. It runs for a few leagues westward. There are rumors of hidden springs near the canyon floor, though also stories of dangerous creatures." "Man." Daenerys considered the name, uncertain whether to laugh at the dramatic flourish or heed the superstitious warnings. "Tell me more of these creatures. Are they real, or invented to frighten children?" Daeron shrugged, his eyes flicking between Daenerys and Jorah. I only heard that some scorpions can grow larger there, and that the shadows of the canyon walls sometimes play tricks, making travelers see ghosts. But I haven't met anyone who truly claimed to face an otherworldly foe. The real threat might be if bandits hide in the crevices, or if there's a risk of a rock slide. Nederwand. Jorah spoke up. We'll post scouts at both ends. The Unsullied are disciplined. Even if bandits ambush us, we stand a good chance. Daenerys narrowed her gaze at the desert horizon. If we keep crossing open dunes, we risk depletion of our supplies before we find another oasis. The canyon may be dangerous, but it could also be our best option. She took a breath, feeling the dryness in her throat. Let's do it. Lead us there. We'll proceed with caution. Dani? Darren bowed, relief evident on his face. Perhaps he feared another long desert route would end in disfavor. With that, Daenerys dismissed him, and he hurried off to gather his belongings. She looked again toward the baggage horse and the chest strapped upon it. No one else paid it much heed, not realizing the extent of the treasure inside. She could almost sense the egg's heartbeat, a silent drum in her thoughts. They resumed the journey, forging deeper into the desert, now with the canyon as their target. The sun dipped slowly westward, the day growing long, and the heat slowly easing. Daenerys still felt the sweat trickle down her back, the thirst pressing against her lips. She drank sparingly, mindful that the well of the oasis could only carry them so far in water skins. Around them, the sands shifted, like restless waves. The sky arced above, a brassy vault with no clouds to soften its glare. By late afternoon, they reached a place where the terrain began to change. Jagged rock formations jutted upward, forming a series of crags and protrusions. Darren signaled from the front, pointing to a tall spire shaped vaguely like a curved tail. Its tip snapped upward, forming a silhouette reminiscent of a venomous stinger. Daenerys felt a flutter of tension at the sight, the name-whispering wound suddenly seeming more apt than whimsical. Even from a distance, the canyon mouth looked like a dark slash in the earth, flanked by towering walls of striated stone. The caravan paused. Jorah sent a few scouts ahead, unsullied with unwavering discipline, to check for immediate danger. Daenerys remained mounted on her horse, scanning the heights for any sign of movement. The air felt oddly still, as though the desert held its breath. She heard a faint whisper, perhaps just the wind curling around the rocks, but it prickled the fine hairs at the back of her neck. Memories of old superstitions about hidden deserts, haunted ravines, and lost travelers flickered through her mind. After some minutes, the scouts returned, reporting the entrance was clear. The path descended in a gradual slope, narrowing between the rocky walls. They hadn't gone too far in, mindful of the possibility of an ambush deeper within. But for the moment, all seemed still. Daenerys exchanged glances with Jorah and nodded her resolve. Even if the canyon carried risks, out in the open, they risked far more. Especially given the precious cargo she carried. The procession moved forward at a careful pace, entering the shadow of the canyon mouth. The coolness struck Daenerys immediately, a blessed relief from the unrelenting sun, but also a weight on her spirit. The rock walls loomed on either side, blotting out the sky. The wind that came through smelled of sandstone and ancient dryness, tinged with something musty. She realized how quickly the environment changed. No longer an endless sea of shimmering dunes, but a narrow corridor of stone and dust, the edges ragged and broken, as if the earth had been torn apart by some ancient force. They proceeded in single file, the ground littered with small rocks. The horses' hooves clattered, echoing. Occasionally, a gust of wind snaked through the canyon, creating a faint moaning sound as it passed over crevices. Daenerys listened, her mind playing tricks, making her imagine distant voices. She glanced at Jorah, seeing his hand rest near the hilt of his sword. She could see the tension in his jaw, though he maintained a steady gaze forward. The Unsullied fanned out as best they could, though the tight space limited them to clusters. They kept watch above, mindful of any ledges where an attacker might lurk. Several times, Daenerys caught a glimpse of small creatures skittering across the stones, lizards perhaps or desert rodents. She saw no sign of large predators. Still, the sense of caution did not leave her. They made slow progress for nearly an hour. The canyon twisted like a serpent, sometimes veering sharply and momentarily blocking out the setting sun. The deeper they went, the cooler the air became, and Daenerys found herself shivering, unexpectedly, in the dimness. The egg was in the chest behind her, strapped to a horse led by a vigilant Unsullied. She kept turning in her saddle, wanting to be sure it was there, safe, unshaken. Each time her eyes fell upon the chest, she recalled the subtle shifting she had felt within the shell. Perhaps the infant dragon sensed the hush of these rocky corridors and curled tighter in waiting. Eventually, the walls opened slightly into a wider clearing, a basin in the canyon where the floor was level enough to set up a temporary camp. By then, the sun had dipped low, the sky overhead a streak of copper and pink. Daenerys saw the advantage of stopping for the night here. They could block the entrance they came from and post guards at the opposite side. She signaled for the caravan to halt. Men and animals alike breathed relief to have a space that wasn't as confining as the narrower passages. The swirl of camp-making began again. Torches were lit along the perimeter. Small fires sparked to life in the center. The canyon walls reflected the light in odd ways, causing dancing shadows to flicker. Daenerys dismounted, rolling her stiff shoulders. Her thighs ached from riding so long in the heat. She flexed her toes in her boots, wishing for a moment to soak her feet in cool water. But she knew that water was precious, and she would not indulge when her men had so many needs. She contented herself with a quick sip from a flask while Missandei and Jorah approached. "Your Grace," Missandei said, her voice subdued in this eerie setting. "We've begun setting up bedrolls here where the ground is more even. Shall we keep the chest with you, or store it somewhere hidden?" Daenerys paused before answering. "We will keep it under guard, but near my tent. I need to monitor its temperature. We must remain vigilant all night." Jorah nodded in agreement, though she saw a flicker of concern in his eyes. "We should double the guard. This place gives too many vantage points for an ambush." "Nine," she agreed, giving orders for a rotating watch. Half the Unsullied awake at any given time. Grey Worm appeared from the gloom, nodding stoically when told. Within an hour, the minimal camp had been arranged. Though no tents were pitched in the usual sense, there wasn't much space for large structures. Daenerys had a partial enclosure set up against a sloping rock face, where a tarp could be hung for some measure of privacy. There, she had the chest placed and a brazier kindled beside it. Night fell swiftly in the canyon. The sky overhead showed only a narrow strip of darkness studded with stars. The rocky walls absorbed the daytime heat, leaving the air chilly enough to make Daenerys wrap a cloak around her shoulders. She sat on a foldable stool near the brazier, staring into the flames. Now and then, the wind coursed through the passage, creating those unsettling whispers. Sometimes it sounded like muttering voices just beyond hearing, and she saw men glancing over their shoulders as though expecting to see ghosts. No ghosts appeared, but Daenerys' thoughts turned inward. She remembered the House of the Undying, the illusions she had faced in Korth, how the warlocks had tried to ensnare her mind with echoes of voices. She had learned then that illusions thrive in places of emptiness and gloom. Could the canyon's shape funnel the wind so that it mimicked lamenting spirits? Possibly, or perhaps older. Stranger powers dwelled here. She was no stranger to the uncanny, yet the hair on her arm stood up each time the wind sighed. Feeling restless, she rose and stood at the edge of the small camp, glancing out into the darkness beyond the torches. Jorah was not far away, conferring with Grey Worm, so she took the moment alone. She listened to the hush, let the cold air prick at her cheeks. In the distance, the canyon walls fell into shadowy arches and ridges, shapes that could have been stone or half-formed monsters. A single star flickered overhead, visible through a break in the heights. She felt it again, that subtle tug in her mind, the fleeting image of Jon Snow. She remembered how they had stood on a snowy battlement once, discussing duties heavier than any one person could bear. She recalled the quiet determination in his dark eyes, the sense that he carried the burdens of the North upon his shoulders. She did not know why the egg's presence evoked him, only that she could not shake the feeling that the unborn dragon was meant for a Targaryen beyond herself. A strange notion, but it lingered. She turned back to her enclosure and found Missandei waiting quietly. The young woman studied Daenerys' face, reading the tension there. "Are you worried about what lies ahead? Or about the egg, Your Grace?" Daenerys let out a long breath. "Both. That and more. I've had dreams I can't fully decipher. I see a future that eludes my grasp." "Depsero." Missandei nodded, sympathy in her eyes. "In the time I've known you, you have always walked a path no one else dared. Perhaps your dreams are guiding you. Sometimes a queen must trust her instincts more than the counsel of others." Daenerys smiled faintly. "Yes, I suppose so. For now, we protect the egg and see how events unfold. In the meantime, get some rest. You've done much today." Missandei dipped her head, stepping away with a gentle smile. Daenerys watched her go, feeling grateful for the unwavering loyalty and compassion. Left alone, Daenerys hovered near the brazier again, letting her gaze fall on the chest. She considered opening it, but decided to wait until the camp stilled further. Too many eyes might wander, and she wanted to sense the egg's heartbeat without distraction. One by one, the sounds of the camp quieted. Men lay down head to head, weapons at their sides. The torches still burned, and the watchmen stood at intervals along the perimeter, their silhouettes dark against the flickering glow. In the narrow canyon, the stars gave little illumination, but the moon was rising somewhere behind the cliff edges, its silver radiance faintly touching the ridges high above. Daenerys found it strangely comforting, a reminder of open sky beyond these enclosing stones. At last, when she felt enough solitude, she knelt beside the chest. Carefully, she opened it, releasing a wave of trapped warmth. The coals in the brazier had been replenished not long ago, so the temperature inside remained stable. Her fingertips brushed the egg's surface. It was nearly too hot to touch for more than a moment. And then she felt it again. A stirring, something within shifting like a dreamer rolling over in sleep. She pressed her ear against the shell, heart pounding. At first, she heard only her own pulse. Then a faint scratch, like claws or talons brushing against an inner wall. Her breath caught in her throat. Was the dragon preparing to hatch? 100 thoughts raced through her mind. The memory of her first hatchlings, the wonder and terror of stepping into those funeral flames, the sudden hush broken by the squeaks of newborn dragons. This felt different, less cataclysmic, more intimate. She pictured a tiny creature curled inside, waiting for the right moment to break free. She closed her eyes, a surge of protectiveness sweeping over her. Softly, she whispered words in High Valyrian, half lullaby, half prayer. The egg twitched against her cheek, and her heart soared. But a moment later, it was still again, the interior quiet. She drew back, her skin flushed from the heat. Perhaps the hatchling's moment was not yet. Still, she knew that movement was a sure sign of life. It made her chest tighten with equal parts joy and dread. What if it hatched tonight, in this canyon haunted by restless winds, with no shelter beyond a makeshift tarp? She glanced around, half expecting the men to sense the stirring, but they remained oblivious. In the hush, she gently lowered the lid, leaving a crack for air. She fed another piece of wood to the brazier, mindful of not overheating the chest, yet unwilling to let the egg cool. The flicker of flames etched shadows on the walls of the enclosure, twisting them into shapes that might have been dragons, or might have been flickers of her imagination. She breathed in slowly, inhaling the scent of burning embers and the dusty air. Exhaustion tugged at her. She had traveled far under a relentless sun. Her body demanded rest, but her mind crackled with thoughts. Finally, she unrolled a thin pallet beside the chest, determined to stay close should the egg stir again. She lay down, pulling a blanket over her legs. Her head rested on a folded cloak. The glow of the brazier gave just enough light to see the outline of the chest, and she found solace in knowing the egg was only an arm's length away. When sleep claimed her, it did so gently, like a lullaby humming through the canyon walls. Her dreams slipped into a swirling tapestry of heat and cold, visions of the desert sands fading into snowy expanses. She saw a mighty fortress of ice rising against a pale sky, its walls luminous and forbidding. She walked inside, footsteps echoing on frozen floors. Torches flickered in brackets, and the cold seeped through the soles of her feet. In this grand hall of ice, a single figure stood waiting. Cloaked in black fur, sword at his side, face solemn. Jon Snow died. His eyes searched hers, unspoken words hanging in the still air. He held something in his hands, an orb the color of midnight. When he extended it toward her, she saw it was the dragon egg, etched with silver streaks. Except it wasn't nestled in a chest or warmed by coals. It gleamed with an inner frost, shimmering with shards of ice along its scales. She tried to speak his name, but the words caught in her throat. He pressed the egg into her hands, and the cold bit at her skin. Still, she refused to let it go. Then, with a slow nod, Jon stepped backward, dissolving into the whiteness as if he were part of the winter itself. She woke with a shudder, the chill of the dream still clinging to her limbs. Reality crept in. The brazier's warmth, the dusty smell of the canyon, the hushed breathing of soldiers nearby. She sat up, noticing the sky beyond the tarp was still dark, though faint lines of silver along the canyon edge hinted at approaching dawn. The coals in the brazier had burned low, so she fed them more fuel. Then she lifted the lid of the chest again, checking on the egg. It remained warm, very warm, but still and silent. Whatever stirring she had felt earlier now lay dormant, as though the hatchling slept once more. She touched the shell softly, her heart pounding with a residual sense of the dream's intensity. Ice and fire, the two extremes that had defined her journey of late. This was no ordinary dragon egg. She was becoming increasingly certain of that. It seemed to straddle something unseen, a hidden axis that connected her flame-born heritage with the icy realm of the north. Could it be that the magic in this egg resonated with both? She had no proofs, no ancient texts to consult, only the whispers of her own soul. Slipping out from under the tarp, she ventured quietly across the camp to where the canyon opened to a ledge overlooking a deeper section. The dawn was near. The sky above glowed with a colorless haze that heralded the sun's approach. Standing at the edge, she peered down into the yawning gulf. Far below, she could just make out a trickle of something glinting, a rivulet of water, perhaps. The wind drifted up, carrying the hushed moan that echoed through the gorge. She closed her eyes, letting her senses expand. She tried to picture the child inside the egg. Was it restless, calling her even in her dreams, or did her own mind conjure illusions? Sometimes she wondered if all Targaryens struggled with visions. Prophetic dreams were said to run in the blood. Her brother Rhaegar had been obsessed with prophecy. Could these images be a warning or a promise? As dawn lightened the sky, the camp stirred. Jorah found her standing at the ledge, offering a soft Khaleesi in greeting. She turned to see him approach with a cautious expression. "You're awake early," he said, crossing his arms. "Couldn't sleep." "Dreams," she answered, not elaborating. She glanced back down the canyon. "We should push onward as soon as possible. I want to find a safer place if we can." He studied her face, then nodded. "We'll wake the men. I'll have the scouts check the next stretch of the canyon. There might be another oasis or a spring along the way." She offered him a small, tired smile. "Thank you, Jorah." She found comfort in his steady presence. Though their relationship had weathered secrets and betrayals, in the end, he remained by her side, an anchor in uncertain times. The hours that followed were a bustle of preparation. Campfires were extinguished. Bedrolls were tied up. Rations distributed. Daenerys made sure the chest was once again secured to the baggage horse, but she could not resist one more check on the egg. This time, it felt slightly cooler to the touch, as though the night air had drained some of its stored heat. That stirred her concern. She gestured for extra coals to be placed in a smaller container strapped beside the chest to keep a constant supply of warmth ready. Moving on, the caravan ventured deeper into the canyon, which twisted and turned with unpredictable angles. The stone walls rose even higher, blotting out the morning sun until the canyon abruptly widened, letting in a slash of blazing daylight. In that sudden brightness, Daenerys had to squint, adjusting to the harsh glare. Ahead, she saw the canyon floor slope downward in a series of natural steps. Water glistened at the lowest level, forming a narrow stream that cut through the stone. The sight of it gladdened her heart, for water was precious beyond measure in this realm. At a signal from Jorah, the company descended carefully, the horses picking their way around loose rocks. The clop of hooves echoed, magnified by the surrounding cliffs. The temperature shifted again, becoming oddly cooler near the water's flow. And though the canyon had an oppressive quality, this trickle of water felt like a small blessing. Once they reached the bank, men refilled their skins, and the horses drank thirstily. Daenerys dismounted to crouch beside the stream, dipping her hand in. The water was cold enough to make her fingers ache, but it revived her senses. As she stood, droplets fell from her fingertips onto the sandy gravel. Her eyes drifted to the chest. She wondered if a gentle cooling might actually mimic the natural cycles an egg would experience in the wild. Dragons, after all, were said to lay eggs in volcanic regions or warm layers, not necessarily in unrelenting scorching heat. Could it be that the hatchling needed fluctuations of temperature to develop fully? She could not know for certain, but the thought made her more open to the water's presence. The group lingered by the stream, letting the animals rest. Meanwhile, Daenerys felt an itch of caution. She scanned the upper ridges of the canyon walls for signs of watchers. The place was too ideal for an ambush, and the sound of the trickling stream covered the subtle noises that might reveal approaching footsteps. She spotted a few black shapes flitting across the rocks, likely carrion birds. She saw no glint of weapons, no silhouettes of archers. Still, her spine tingled. At Jorah's suggestion, a handful of Unsullied set off upstream to scout. Grey Worm led another group downstream. Daenerys remained in the center with the bulk of the caravan, including the baggage horse bearing the chest. She paced slowly, arms folded, thinking of the dream that lingered in her mind. The chill of that ice fortress still haunted her, as though it had a message she failed to decipher. Within the hour, Grey Worm returned. He reported that the stream vanished into an underground tunnel further down the canyon, its path blocked by fallen stones. No easy route forward that way. The group that went upstream had found the water source trickling out from a crack in the canyon wall, forming a small pool near a cluster of wiry plants. No sign of bandits or monstrous creatures. But, they warned, some of the ledges were precarious, and a misstep could be fatal. With limited choices, Daenerys decided they would follow the upstream path for as long as they could, hoping it might lead to an exit or a gentler route out of the canyon. The men fell back into formation. She stroked the neck of her mare, reassuring the animal, which seemed nervous in these close confines. Mounting again, she took the lead, flanked by Jorah and Grey Worm, the chest well guarded in the middle of the column. As they proceeded, the canyon wall squeezed in places, forcing them to move in single file across narrow ledges. The hush was broken only by the soft trickle of water and the occasional rattle of pebbles dislodged beneath hooves. The dryness of the air, combined with the chill radiating off the stone, created a disconcerting equilibrium. Daenerys felt sweat bead at her temples, even as gooseflesh rose on her arms. It was as though the canyon itself could not decide whether it was hot or cold, stifling or freeing. After a slow climb, the path widened slightly into a shelf that overlooked the stream some 20 feet below. The water shimmered in a ribbon of reflected light. Ahead, they could see the canyon turning again, bending to the left. Daeron, leading the way, held up a hand for them to pause. He dismounted, stepping carefully to the bend to peer around. Daenerys waited, feeling her heart pound. The men behind her shifted uneasily. Moments later, Daeron waved them forward. There was no immediate danger, just a stretch of open canyon, broader than before. They entered this new expanse, and Daenerys found herself surrounded by walls that soared hundreds of feet above, forming an almost circular amphitheater. The water spread out along the base, forming a shallow pool. Pale sunlight filtered through an opening near the top, giving the entire place a diffuse glow. The echoes of their movement reverberated strangely, creating a multiplicity of footfalls and hoofbeats. She felt as though eyes were on them from every angle, yet the stony ledges appeared empty. She ordered the men to halt and examine the area, curiosity rising. How could a formation like this remain hidden? The canyon had twisted so often that from outside, this place would be invisible. She dismounted carefully, walking forward on foot. The ground was uneven, scattered with boulders. Jorah and Grey Worm flanked her, scanning for threats. Some of the others started to circle the perimeter. She noticed plants clinging to cracks in the stone, along with dried creepers drooping like ghostly drapes. Suddenly a sharp sound echoed, a rock tumbling from above. Every head snapped upward. Daenerys' pulse raced. She expected to see shapes on the clifftop, archers or something worse. But nothing emerged. The stone had simply broken free from an overhang. Still, the effect on her nerves was undeniable. She drew in a slow breath to steady herself. Then, at the corner of her vision, she caught a flicker of movement near the pool. She turned swiftly, her heart clutching. But when she looked more carefully, there was only water rippling. Perhaps from a fish or a stray breeze. She frowned. Could something be living in this deeper portion of the canyon pool? Uncertain, she gestured for Jorah and a few men to investigate. She herself approached with caution, hand hovering near the hilt of a dagger. Reaching the edge of the pool, she saw that the water was surprisingly clear, reflecting the sky overhead. Small fish darted about, pale shapes flickering. That was likely all she'd seen. She let out a breath of relief, feeling vaguely foolish. Even so, she would remain cautious. The men soon confirmed there were no immediate threats, though the fish might be caught for food if needed. She turned her attention back to the caravan. They stood in a loose circle, flanked by canyon walls that soared upward in layered shades of red and brown. The chest containing the egg was near the center, the baggage horse shifting its weight. Daenerys found her gaze gravitating toward it again. She could sense that subtle undercurrent, a slow awakening, like dawn creeping into a dark sky. Catching Jorah's eye, she murmured, "We'll rest here for a short while. Let the horses drink again. Then we press on to see if the canyon continues. If not, we'll have to double back." He agreed, dispatching men to scout. Daenerys signaled Missandei to help distribute water. The echoes of their voices bounced in strange patterns, some angles of rock carrying the sound further than others. Daenerys watched as a few unsullied led the animals to the shallow water's edge. The men moved with cautious efficiency, eyes continually scanning the ridges. She took the opportunity to approach the chest again. The baggage horse seemed weary, so she allowed one of the soldiers to hold the reins. Crouching beside the chest, Daenerys felt her pulse quicken. Each time she checked on the egg, she was half afraid she'd see cracks. With a careful hand, she lifted the lid. Warmth washed over her, mingling with the dusty air of the canyon. The egg glowed faintly, its silver streaks catching the stray beams of sunlight. Leaning in, she brushed her fingers along the shell, seeking any change. Her breath hitched when she felt a slight ridge she hadn't noticed before. A faint vein or hairline crease upon the scales. Was it a crack forming, or just a natural groove in the pattern? Her heart hammered. She pressed gently, half expecting the shell to give way. It held firm, but she could have sworn she felt a tiny shudder in response, like a creature stirring. She exhaled slowly, her emotions roiling. A crack could mean the hatching was imminent, or it could be superficial. She glanced at Jorah, who was busy conversing with Grey Worm about the best vantage points for guards. She would tell him soon, but for the moment, she wanted to be certain. Carefully, she closed the chest, swallowing her tumult of feelings. The day was not over, and they still needed to find a safe exit from this labyrinth of stone. If the egg did begin to hatch, she might be forced to improvise. Here in the shadow of these towering canyon walls, steadying herself, she rose to her feet. The warmth of the egg lingered on her skin. She gazed around at the makeshift camp, the men scattered in clusters, the hush of the canyon amplified by the whisper of a faint breeze. Time felt suspended, as though the world had folded in on itself. Deep in her heart, she sensed that events were converging, shaped by unseen hands. She thought again of her dream. The winter fortress, Jon Snow, the egg slick with ice. Perhaps the dragon to come would bind together these polar forces, or perhaps it would tip the balance in ways she could not foresee. All she could do, in this moment, was protect what she had found, guide it toward life, and keep her people moving forward. The canyon might whisper of lost hopes and hidden dangers, But Daenerys Targaryen was no stranger to forging paths through the unknown. She squared her shoulders, checking the dagger at her belt. The sunlight overhead shifted, painting the stone in new shades. Another hour or two of daylight remained before nightfall wrapped the canyon in darkness again. "Onward," she said softly to herself, a vow more than a command. "We go on." She signaled to Jorah, who promptly ordered the men to break their brief rest. Tending to the chest with utmost care, she made sure it was secured once more. Then, as the caravan formed its column, the clang of metal and the shuffle of hooves echoed in the amphitheater. Daenerys mounted her mare again, taking a final glance around the rock walls, as though memorizing every crag and shadow. Slowly, steadily, they filed out of the wide space, following the upstream path. The canyon grew narrower again, winding in a labyrinthine course that tested their endurance. The hush deepened with each bend. Daenerys' thoughts spun with questions about the egg, the future, and the meaning of her dreams. Yet, she remained resolute, guiding her people further into the heart of the rock, where only faint glimmers of light crept in from above. She prayed, silently, that she would find a place of safety before the egg demanded to emerge into the world. She prayed she would have the wisdom to welcome it without blood and fire this time, if that was truly possible. And somewhere in her chest, beneath the layers of uncertainty and longing, she carried a warmth that told her she was on the brink of discovery, of a destiny that stretched far beyond the desert, beyond the canyon, threading through the realms of both fire and ice. And she would face it, one foot after another, until the path revealed itself in full. Ah, Dakai shooed. They advanced deeper into the canyon, guided by the uneven ribbon of water that wove its way across stone. In some places, it spread into little pools, translucent in the half-light, then funneled again into a narrow trickle. The sky above was visible only in ragged slices, blue turning steadily to gold, then deepening toward a purple twilight as the hours passed. The weight of those towering walls pressed upon the travelers, and even the horses grew jumpy, their ears flicking at each echo. Daenerys tried to keep her seat calm and her posture straight, though a coil of unease wound through her abdomen. She glanced back more often than she liked, eyes settling on the baggage horse in the middle of their column. There, beneath a carefully tied canvas, lay the chest, and within it, the dragon egg that had steadily warmed under her care. Thoughts of the faint crack she had felt on its surface had plagued her since she last checked. She worried about the timing. Should the shell break too soon, the hatchling might be born into confusion. She also worried that if the egg did not hatch, it might languish in a half-awakened state, an unfulfilled promise. Uncertainty gnawed at her. Jorah rode closer, flicking his gaze upward along the crags. No sign of a clear exit. A wind rose, whistling through unseen hollows in the canyon walls, carrying with it a thin moan that set the hairs on Daenerys' arms upright. She could almost believe voices lurked within the rock, but logic told her it was the simple resonance of air across crevices. Still, it sounded like lamentation. Ahead, Daeron walked on foot, leading his mare by the reins as he scanned for a path wide enough to proceed. Now and again he paused, shading his eyes with one hand while calling back that the water continued forward. For the moment, there was no reason to stop. Daenerys watched him with a mixture of gratitude and caution. He had led them here, yes, but he was still an unknown. So far, though, his counsel had proven honest enough. The light shifted as the hours passed, the sun drawing toward the western rim. Soon, they would have to consider stopping for the night again. Camping within these twisting ravines was risky, but pressing on in darkness was worse. Missandei rode near the middle of the group, occasionally calling out to men who looked exhausted, offering them bits of bread or a ladle of water. Daenerys admired her friend's unwavering diligence. By late afternoon, they reached a wider bowl in the canyon, where the water pooled more generously. A few hardy shrubs clung to the rocky edges. Several men murmured relief at the sight. Fresh water for the horses at least. But there was something else that caught Daenerys' attention. A curious hush in the air, as though the wind had stilled. The moaning echoes stopped, replaced by a resounding quiet. Jorah brought his horse alongside Daenerys. He spoke in a low voice, so as not to carry far. "We should consider making camp here, Khaleesi. If the men are too weary, and the horses slip in the dark, we could find ourselves trapped at a dead end with no safe place to stand. This opening is at least large enough to set a perimeter. She nodded, though a knot of anxiety tightened behind her ribs. Agreed. It's not ideal, but it's better than getting caught in a narrower spot after sunset. She scanned the rim of the canyon. The walls here were steep, but not as overwhelmingly tall as before. There was a ledge high above that might serve as a vantage point for guards. Jorah dismounted and signaled for Grey Worm to organize a defensive perimeter. Unsullied moved like fluid shadows, spreading out along the basin. A group of them climbed a stone slope that led to the higher ledge. The rest began to form a ring of tents near the water's edge, well out of the muddy patches to avoid sinking. The baggage animals were led to a flatter area, where the ground was firm enough for them to rest. Daenerys took a moment to check each grouping of her people, ensuring no one was left behind in the labyrinth. When the basic camp was established, the men lit small fires that cast flickering shapes on the canyon walls. Shadows stretched and shifted, giving the impression of movement where there was none. Daenerys found herself flinching at the corner of her vision, seeing ghosts in the stone. She berated herself silently for her jumpiness. She was not a frightened girl anymore, but a queen who had walked through fire. Still, she kept her senses alert as she moved toward the baggage horse bearing the chest. 2 Unsullied guarded it, spears in hand. They parted for her without a word. She knelt beside the chest, exhaling as she unfastened the straps. The faint radiance of dusk lit the area, and she felt the day's heat receding into the cold stone around them. Carefully, she eased the lid open. At once, a gust of warmth hit her face. The coals inside had been replenished earlier, but she could tell they were now turning to embers. The egg lay atop its wrappings. Even in the half-light, she saw how the silver streaks glimmered like polished metal. She ran her hand lightly over the surface, her fingers seeking that tiny ridge that had alarmed her before. She found it easily. Indeed, it felt more pronounced, or maybe that was her imagination. Her heart pounded. Slowly, she pressed her ear to the shell. She heard or sensed a faint scrape, like a feather-light brush of something inside. A twitch, perhaps, but not yet the cracking that heralded a true hatching. She drew away, feeling a mix of awe and trepidation. Then she noticed that the shell's warmth was strong, but not scalding. She decided to stir the embers a bit, feeding them another handful of kindling to maintain a gentle heat. Just then Missandei's voice reached her. "Your Grace," she said softly, stepping to Daenerys' side. "We found some fish in the pool. Grey Worm suggests sending a few men to catch them. It will supplement our rations. Is that acceptable?" Daenerys nodded. "Yes, see it done. Let's spare as much grain as we can for the horses. They'll need energy to climb these paths." She closed the chest gently, making sure enough air could circulate within. Then she stood, adjusting the cloak around her shoulders. Missandei watched her with quiet curiosity. "Did you feel anything new?" she asked, her gaze flickering toward the chest. Daenerys hesitated a moment. She trusted Missandei above almost anyone. "There's a crack forming, I believe. No real break, but the shell is thinner in one spot. I think the hatchling is stirring." She lowered her voice. "We must be prepared that it could happen any time in the coming days." Missandei's eyes lit with wonder and a flicker of worry. Should we set aside a special space or enclosure? Daenerys thought of it. If the egg cracked in the open, the little dragon would be vulnerable. She remembered how Drogon, Rhaegal, and Viserion had hatched in the midst of chaos. Flames, blood, the swirl of magic. But those eggs had needed an extraordinary event. This one seemed to be coming awake more slowly, perhaps more naturally. "If we find a stable cavern or a sheltered corner, that might help," she said. "But here in this canyon, the best we can do is keep it close to me. The moment it hatches, I need to be there." Missandei placed a hand over her own heart. "I'll help in any way I can." Daenerys gently clasped Missandei's hand, grateful. Then she turned her attention to the rest of the camp. Men were kneeling at the water's edge, spearing fish under Grey Worm's command. Others were collecting stones and bits of driftwood that had washed down the stream over time, fueling a set of small cooking fires. Daenerys could smell the tang of cooking flesh soon enough. Hunger gnawed at her belly, reminding her she hadn't eaten much all day. She gestured for Missandei to see about the distribution of the food, while Daenerys herself circled the camp's perimeter. She found Jorah inspecting an outcropping of rock near the far side of the basin. The knight pressed a hand against the surface, as though testing its stability. When he heard her approach, he turned, bowing his head in greeting. "I was thinking we could station a couple of archers here, Khaleesi," he said. "They'd have a view of the entire basin, in case something tries to sneak up." She nodded. "Good. Let's do that." Then she lowered her voice. "The egg shows more signs of activity. I suspect we don't have much time before it emerges." His brows shot up. "Already?" She nodded, crossing her arms to ward off a subtle chill in the air. "It hasn't truly cracked yet, but it's close. I can feel it in my bones." Jorah exhaled. A mixture of admiration and trepidation tightened his features. "Then we must ensure the men are ready, just in case. A young dragon, it can startle them, cause confusion, especially in a place like this. Perhaps we should warn Grey Worm and Missandei, so they can be prepared to calm any panic. But we keep the secret from the rest, yes?" "In matter sore." "Exactly," Daenerys said. "Only those who must know." She paused, glancing at the stone around them. "Do you think we can find a safer space to rest tomorrow? Perhaps higher ground?" He considered. "We can try, though we'd have to see what the scouts find. There might be an exit from the canyon if we climb that slope to the north. But it could also be a dead end." Daenerys nodded, recognizing that they had few certainties. "We'll do our best. If the egg hatches before we're free of this canyon, we'll deal with it. The hatchling will be vulnerable, but I won't abandon it." Jorah agreed silently. For a moment, his gaze rested on her, as though he wanted to say more. Perhaps about the strangeness of discovering another egg, or about how this one felt different. But he said nothing, merely straightened, and gave her a respectful nod. They parted ways. Daenerys made her way back to the central fires, where a modest meal of roasted fish and leftover flatbread was being served. She accepted a small portion, eating methodically while the men around her spoke in low tones about the canyon's eerie sounds. Some said the wind carried the cries of lost spirits. Others dismissed such notions, calling them desert superstitions. Daenerys listened without comment, though inwardly she found the place unsettling as well. Danger could come in many forms, human or otherwise. Night crept upon them once more, the sky overhead a thin band of black, dotted with countless stars. At the lower levels of the canyon, all was deep shadow. Torchlight outlined hunched forms of tired travelers, a ring of glimmering embers around the basin. Daenerys stationed herself in a sheltered spot near the chest, with a canvas overhead to block any stray drafts. She had a brazier there, stoked to a moderate blaze. The chest rested within arm's reach, so she could check on it whenever she wished. She spoke briefly with Missandei, ensuring everything was in order, then dismissed her to find rest. Grey Worm and Jorah discussed the watch rotations, deciding that men would take shifts through the night. All seemed well organized, so Daenerys settled onto her bedding, perched against a rolled blanket. She kept the chest lid cracked. From time to time, she'd lean over and place her hand on the shell. Each time, it felt marginally different. Sometimes the shell radiated strong heat, sometimes only a soft warmth, but she sensed subtle flickers from within, as though the occupant tested its boundaries. She did not undress fully, only removing her boots and cloak. The air was too damp and cool in these depths to sleep comfortably without some layers. So she kept a tunic and leggings on. The brazier's glow danced across the stone walls, painting them in liquid shadows. She tried not to let her mind wander to the day's fatigue or the swirl of memories, the dream of ice, the fleeting thought of Jon Snow. Instead, she focused on the present, on the slow, steady breathing that calmed her. She felt the dryness at the back of her throat and took a sip of water from a clay cup. Then, with a final quiet murmur, she drifted into an uneasy sleep. Hours later, something woke her. At first, she thought it was just the whispering wind. But no, there was a subtle scraping sound very close. She blinked, disoriented by the half-dark. The brazier had burned low, leaving only faintly glowing embers. The canyon outside was silent, or as silent as it ever was, the occasional drip of water and scuff of men's boots on rock. Then she heard it again, a low rattle, as if claws tapped against a hard surface. She jolted upright, heart lurching. The chest. The egg. She reached out and lifted the lid fully, her hand trembling. A wave of heat rolled into her face, much hotter than before. She peered down. In the gloom, she saw the eggshell gleaming with an almost liquid sheen, and the crack she had felt before was now visibly widened, forming a jagged line. The shell emitted a faint glow from within, as though a banked fire had awakened behind thin scales. She heard a soft scratching, distinct this time, and her breath caught in her throat. It was the sound of a creature stirring, scraping at the barrier that kept it from the world. Hope and apprehension warred in her. A hatching here, in a precarious camp within a haunted canyon, was far from ideal, but she had no power to slow nature's course. If the hatchling was ready, it would come. Keeping her voice low, she leaned out of the enclosure and spotted one of the unsullied guards. She beckoned him closer, instructing him to find Jorah and Missandei quickly, but quietly. The guard bowed and trotted off, disappearing into the darkness. Daenerys turned back to the chest, her mouth dry. She remembered the roars of Drogon, Rhaegal, and Viserion when they first burst free. But those had been dramatic births in a conflagration. This was subtler, a quiet, persistent effort to break through. She placed her palm on the shell, feeling the intense heat that pulsed beneath. She winced, but forced her hand to remain. The new crack lengthened before her eyes, branching outward like lightning across midnight sky. The silver lines of the shell glowed faintly. A hush fell over her senses, as though the world had distilled into the moment. Dragon and mother. She recalled old tales. How dragon eggs sometimes required a nudge, a word, a whisper, a kiss of flame. She whispered in High Valyrian, words of welcome and encouragement, the same lullabies she'd once murmured to her first eggs. Footsteps approached. Jorah arrived first, sword belted at his side, his face tight with urgency. "Khaleesi," he whispered. Then he caught sight of the egg. He inhaled sharply. "It's happening." Missandei was right behind him, eyes round with astonishment. She said nothing but sank to her knees beside Daenerys, gaze fixed on the spiderweb cracks forming. The three of them formed a small tense circle around the chest. Outside, the world might as well have ceased to exist. Daenerys allowed no one else near, though she could sense Unsullied posted discreetly, ensuring their privacy. The shell crackled, the noise reminiscent of fire coursing over a log. Tiny flakes of scale dislodged, shimmering as they fell away. Beneath them lay a duller layer that glowed red-orange in places. Daenerys felt sweat trickling down her brow. It was unbearably hot near the chest, as though the air ignited around the egg. She inched back just enough to keep from burning, yet she refused to abandon the hatchling. She thought of the first dragons, how they had recognized her in that moment of birth. But this time, there was no blazing pyre. Her blood was not on the flames. Yet she believed with every fiber of her being that this creature would know her if only she remained present. She whispered again, voice trembling. "Come forth, child of flame." A sudden jolt shook the egg, and a larger crack tore across its surface. A piece of shell, the size of her palm, broke away, revealing a gleam within, something shifting, alive. Daenerys gasped. She glimpsed a tiny muzzle or snout, scaled in a dark hue that gleamed black, tinged with faint streaks of silver. The hatchling pushed outward, scraping with a minuscule claw. Jorah swore under his breath, and Missandei let out a stifled exclamation. A low, fragile cry emerged from inside the shell, a plaintive squeak that seemed to rattle Daenerys' very heart. She felt tears prick her eyes at the sound. How many had doubted that more dragons could come into the world? Yet, here was living proof, forcing its way through the barrier. She leaned close, ignoring the heat that flushed her cheeks. "Yes," he murmured. "We are here." More shell fragments fell, revealing a slender head, no bigger than her fist. Scales dark as onyx shimmered in the faint light, each ridge outlined in silver as though etched by moonlight. Tiny horns curled back from the brow, also tipped in silver. The hatchling's eyes blinked open, hazy at first, then focusing with uncanny intelligence. Daenerys inhaled sharply. They were not the usual molten gold or red. Instead, they shone a pale gray, like clouds on a stormy horizon. The little creature squeaked again, struggling to free its shoulders. Small wings folded awkwardly around its body, still slick with embryonic fluid. Missandei stifled a gasp of delight. Jorah watched, spellbound, sword forgotten at his side. Daenerys carefully reached in, hooking her hands beneath the fragile wings. She recalled how Drogon and his siblings had shrieked at the slightest jostle, biting and clawing with newborn ferocity. But this hatchling merely whimpered, squirming in her grip. She eased it out of the shell, feeling the wetness and the heat, praying she wouldn't hurt it. It was small. So small, perhaps half the size Drogon had been at birth. She cradled it against her chest, letting the remnants of shell slide away. A final bit of eggshell dangled from the hatchling's hind leg, but with a tiny kick, it broke free. For a moment, the hatchling lay limp, shivering. Daenerys bent her head close, ignoring the scorching feel of the little body. She whispered soothing words in Valyrian. The baby dragon coughed, a raspy sound, then parted its jaws. A puff of warm air hit Daenerys' cheek. She saw the promise of flame behind those jaws, though it was not yet strong enough to scorch. She stroked the scaly neck gently, marveling at the texture. Fine ridges, each scale distinct. The wings, half unfurled, appeared lined with a translucent membrane that gleamed a smoky silver. At last, the hatchling lifted its head, blinking at Daenerys. Their eyes met. A hush settled, so profound that Daenerys felt her own heartbeat drumming in her ears. She felt the intangible bond spark between them, like a key sliding into a lock. It recognized her, the warm presence that had kept it safe. But there was something else. Something tugging at the corners of her mind. An echo of distant winds. An unspoken question. She sensed a pull that did not originate in her alone. It was as if the little dragon's spirit extended beyond this small campsite, drawn toward a place or person unknown. She shook off the odd impression, refocusing on the present. She helped the hatchling onto the soft wrappings within the chest, letting it stand on its own shaky legs. It tried to unfurl its wings. The wings were longer than she expected for such a small body, tipping precariously on the edge of proportion. For a moment, it nearly toppled, releasing a distressed squeal. Daenerys steadied it with a palm, feeling its heartbeat flutter. She looked to Jorah, tears threatening to cloud her vision. "Another dragon," she breathed, voice trembling. "A new life." Jorah's eyes shone with reverence. "I never thought I'd see such a thing again." "The world changes around you, Khaleesi." Missandei let out a soft laugh of wonder. "Its eyes, they're so pale. Like ash or snow." Daenerys nodded, lightly grazing her knuckle against the hatchling's snout. The baby emitted a soft chirping noise, then hiccuped, releasing a tiny wisp of smoke. Daenerys felt her heart melt. A swirl of memory flickered. The dream of Jon Snow handing her a frost-kissed egg. She shook it off. This creature was here, in her hands, in the heat of the desert. She gently wiped some of the sticky residue from its scales with a cloth. The next challenge was to feed it. She remembered how Drogon and his siblings had devoured raw meat moments after birth. Looking over her shoulder, she caught sight of one of the small fires that had been used to cook fish. She beckoned Missandei to bring a piece of raw fish quickly. Missandei complied, rummaging among their supplies until she found a freshly cleaned fish that had not yet been placed over the flame. Daenerys held the fish near the hatchling's snout. At first, the little dragon seemed confused, sniffing and flicking its forked tongue. Then instinct took over. It snapped its jaws, clamping onto the fish's tail. Daenerys guided the morsel toward the hatchling's mouth, and the tiny creature tore at it with surprising vigor. The crunch of bones was faint, but visceral. Jorah half smiled at the display of a newborn predator. Daenerys fed it slowly, bit by bit, ensuring it didn't choke. Each swallow made the hatchling tremble in what appeared to be both hunger and excitement. While it ate, Daenerys examined it further. The color was indeed a deep black across most of its scales, but silver filaments traced along the ridges of its spine and around its eyes. Perhaps those filaments would change color as it aged, or perhaps they'd remain as they were, giving this dragon a stark contrast of night and moonlight. She recalled that each of her original 3 dragons had possessed distinct coloring. This newcomer had a singular beauty, one that suggested a lineage both akin to and yet separate from her older dragons. When at last the hatchling had devoured enough, it let out a small warbling sound. Daenerys stroked its head, feeling an unexpected well of emotion. She sensed Jorah at her side, trying to maintain a respectful distance, but plainly in awe. Missandei hovered near, hands clasped in front of her chest. There was a moment of fragile peace. Then Daenerys realized she needed to check the hatchling's body temperature. Dragons thrived in warmth, especially in early life. She gently lifted the small creature, placing it closer to the brazier's lingering coals. The dragon let out a squeak of protest, but when it felt the heat radiating, it relaxed, wings twitching in contentment. Daenerys laughed softly, tears mixing with the dryness in her throat. For a time, none of them spoke, merely watching the newborn shift and attempt to stand more firmly. But as the hush continued, Daenerys' mind filled with pressing questions. Where had this egg truly come from? How had it survived, so apparently alive, beneath the desert sands? And why did she feel a subtle sense that the hatchling looked to her yet also gazed beyond her, as if searching for something absent? She glanced at Jorah, who must have been thinking along similar lines. His mouth was drawn tight in reflection. He gave a faint shake of his head as though reading her thoughts. Some questions have no quick answers, Khaleesi, he said softly. We can only be grateful for this miracle. She agreed inwardly. A miracle indeed, but miracles often came paired with omens. She gently maneuvered the hatchling so it could rest on the cloth near the brazier. Its eyes drooped, still half-lidded with exhaustion from the birth. It needed sleep to recover. She would keep it protected from drafts, but not so sweltering that it overheated. The old knowledge in her blood guided her, reminding her of how she'd nurtured Drogon and the others. The difference was that she'd done so in a city, with fewer constraints, and she'd had the benefit of raw power emanating from her own legend. Here, she was just a woman in a canyon, with limited supplies and men who might not be prepared for another mouth that breathed fire. She motioned for Missandei to check the perimeter, ensuring no one else intruded on this moment. Missandei vanished outside, and Daenerys listened to the faint echoes of the camp. Footsteps, low voices, some men still awake on watch, but many had turned in. She knew dawn was still hours away. This was the quietest stretch of night, when the world felt both intimate and menacing. Jorah watched her, gaze gentle. You've done it again, he said quietly. You've brought a dragon into the world. She managed a wry smile. I wonder if this one will choose me as mother or if it's meant for another. Could dragons choose their riders if the fates align differently? Now? He tilted his head. Some say they do. The bond between dragons and Targaryens has always been mysterious. You have that blood, but you are not the only one. He spoke the words carefully, as though unsure how they would be received. She nodded, acknowledging the unspoken truth. Jon Snow was also of Targaryen blood, a fact that both complicated and illuminated so many events. A part of her heart clenched at his memory. She forced herself to focus on the hatchling. For now, it's just a newborn. It needs food, warmth, and protection. We can worry about the rest later. Then, Jorah inclined his head. I'll inform Grey Worm and Missandei to keep an eye out for frightened reactions, but we won't announce this publicly yet, unless you wish it. Daenerys shook her head. Not yet. Let the men sleep. They'll notice soon enough in the morning, or if the hatchling cries out. But for now, we keep things calm. Jorah agreed. With a final respectful bow, he backed away to resume his vigilant watch on the camp. Daenerys turned her attention to the newborn. It had curled up on the cloth, eyes closed, the faintest sound of breath escaping its tiny nostrils. Up close, she noticed more details. Minute spines around the jawline, the curve of its talons, the gentle heave of its narrow chest. An overwhelming wave of protectiveness washed through her. She scooted closer, setting a soft blanket near the brazier to trap heat. Then, careful not to disturb the creature, she sank back on her heels. With the chest empty, save for broken shell pieces, she thought about how fragile it looked. She remembered stories of newly hatched dragons being quite aggressive. But this one seemed peaceful, almost uncertain of its new surroundings. Perhaps it was simply exhausted, or perhaps each dragon possessed its own temperament. Either way, she felt blessed by its calm presence. In the hush, her mind drifted. She recalled the old Targaryen tales, each featuring a rider and a dragon bound in fate. She had named her first three after the ones she had lost: Drogo, Rhaegar, and Viserys. But this hatchling demanded a different name, something that recognized the swirl of strangeness around its birth. She let a few possibilities dance through her thoughts. Maybe a name from Valyrian lore, or something that bridged another language. She decided she would wait a short while, observe the hatchling, and see what name might reveal itself through its nature. She heard approaching footsteps. Missandei returned, stepping quietly to avoid startling the sleeping dragon. "All is calm outside, Your Grace," she murmured. "No one suspects. The watchers have their eyes on the canyon ridges." "Bastion-sen." Daenerys nodded, exhaling in relief. She felt the tension leave her shoulders. "Good. With luck, we can pass the rest of the night without incident." Missandei crouched beside her, studying the hatchling with open adoration. "He's so small," she breathed, "and so beautiful. The world will tremble when he grows." Daenerys softly corrected her. "I'm not sure yet if it's a he or a she. Dragons can be unpredictable in that regard. Some texts say they can shift genders, others say the difference is almost impossible to discern at this stage." "Then, Missandei smiled sheepishly. "I forgot that detail. Still, it's a blessing no matter what it is." Daenerys ran a finger across the hatchling's neck, marveling at the softness between the ridges of scales. "A blessing indeed," she echoed. Then, reminded of practicality, she motioned to a small water skin. "Could you dampen a cloth for me? I'd like to clean off more of the residue on its scales. It's best not to leave it to harden." "Then," Missandei complied, gently dabbing the cloth in water and handing it over. Daenerys wiped the sticky film away from the dragon's wings and limbs. It shifted in its doze, but did not wake fully. She worked patiently, speaking in low, soothing tones. The egg fragments glinted in the dim light, each piece etched with swirling patterns. When she was done, Daenerys set them aside, knowing they might hold sentimental or symbolic value. Perhaps if they survived this desert journey, she would keep a shard as a reminder of the day the impossible happened once again. Time slipped by without clear measure. The canyon's night had a timeless quality. Now and then Daenerys heard the faint calls of men changing watch shifts. She felt exhaustion tugging at her, but she refused to leave the hatchling. She propped herself against the stacked blankets, letting her eyes drift shut for minutes at a time, yet always snapping awake if the dragon stirred. Missandei dozed beside her in a similar fashion. Eventually, the hatchling gave a little sneeze, fluttering its eyelids. Daenerys bent over it at once, whispering softly. It stretched its wings, letting out a small cry. She sensed it might be hungry again. Missandei fetched another morsel of raw fish. The hatchling tore into the meat with more vigor than before, swallowing lumps bigger than Daenerys would have thought possible. When it finished, it let out a tiny belch, producing a smoky puff that drifted toward the tarp overhead. Daenerys and Missandei exchanged a brief laugh. Relief threaded through their amusement. After the feeding, the little dragon settled once more, nestling in the warmth of the brazier. Daenerys' chest felt tight with affection. She yearned for Drogon, Rhaegal, and Viserion at that moment, remembering their early days. But they were grown now. Drogon especially, the largest and most temperamental. She wondered how they would react to a new sibling. Dragons could be fiercely territorial, but they also recognized kin. A swirl of worry rose. How would she even introduce them if she was still far from any city or secure land? Pushing the thought aside, she let her eyes half close. A doze enveloped her, broken by flickers of dream visions. The silhouette of the new dragon in flight, its silver-tipped wings glinting against a pale sky. She saw vague shapes of a castle, tall spires disappearing into snowfall. And once more, she glimpsed a black-haired figure, turned away from her, a cloak of direwolf fur trailing across crisp, white ground. His breath formed steam in the frigid air. She tried to call out, but the dream dissipated before the figure turned around. She stirred, unsettled, her heart beating too fast. The canyon dawn came gradually, a pale light creeping over the rim of stone. It found Daenerys still awake, or barely so, with the newborn dragon curled at her side. Missandei stirred, yawning softly. The men outside shifted from the last watch to morning routines. A hum of voices announced the start of a new day. Daenerys drew a slow breath, then carefully rose, mindful not to wake the hatchling. She stretched her stiff limbs and stepped out from under the tarp. She was greeted by the sight of a narrow band of sky overhead, tinted with pink and pale yellow. The stone walls glowed faintly in that early sunlight. Jorah was there, speaking with Grey Worm about scouting the next portion of the canyon. When he saw Daenerys, he paused, waiting for her. She approached, massaging the back of her neck. He bowed his head in greeting. "How fares our new friend, Khaleesi?" "She ate twice more in the night," Daenerys said, glancing back at the enclosure. "Seems healthy. Sleeping now." Grey Worm listened with that ever-present composure. "Do we announce the news to the men?" Daenerys hesitated. She was keenly aware that a newborn dragon might cause excitement or fear. Yet these were her people. Many had followed her precisely because she was the mother of dragons. Hiding it forever was impossible. "We can't hide the cries for long," she said. "And if it needs feeding regularly, others will notice. Let the truth be known by midday. But keep the men calm. No grand announcements, no shouting of a new age. Just let it be understood that our queen has another dragon in her care." Grey Worm nodded. "Yes, Your Grace." Jorah spoke quietly. "In the meantime, we'll look for a way out of the canyon. If we're forced to remain too many days, we risk running low on supplies, and the environment here is unpredictable. I suggest we send 2 scouting parties, the first to climb that slope northward, the second to follow the stream further west." Daenerys agreed. "Do it. I'll remain here with the hatchling and the main group. We'll move once we have a clear route." She turned to Grey Worm again. "Take your best men. Go carefully. There could be unstable rocks or hidden drops." "Nenner Dolench." Grey Worm saluted, then left with several Unsullied to assemble the scouting teams. Jorah lingered a moment. "How are you faring, Khaleesi?" he asked gently, concern softening his voice. She gave a short laugh, rubbing at her tired eyes. "Weary, but I've been more exhausted before. At least this time the cause is a wondrous one, not a tragedy." She paused, letting her gaze wander over the canyon. "Still, I can't shake the feeling that this place is testing us. We've been led here, and now we must find a way out, as though the desert itself demanded payment for the gift of the egg." "Nilribem." Jorah glanced at the stone walls. Canyons often symbolize both shelter and entrapment, depending on one's perspective. But you've never failed to find a path forward. She offered a faint smile, touched by his confidence. "Then let's hope we can do so again." He bowed slightly and left to coordinate the search. Daenerys inhaled the crisp morning air, noticing how it felt colder in her lungs than the night's warmth around the brazier. She walked to the edge of the pool, crouching to splash water on her face. The shock of cold helped clear her head. The water reflected her image, eyes shadowed by fatigue, silver hair a bit disheveled. Yet she saw a spark in her own gaze, hope or something close to it. As the camp stirred, men began to talk among themselves. Some noticed the chest near Daenerys' sleeping area was no longer closed. A few approached with curiosity, though they kept a respectful distance, exchanging glances as if suspecting that the rumored object inside had come to life. Daenerys let them wonder for now, focusing on immediate tasks. She ate a quick breakfast of leftover flatbread and a few dates from their stores. Missandei brought her a portion of roasted fish as well. While she ate, she kept glancing at the enclosure, ensuring she heard no distressed cries. The baby dragon still slept, or so she assumed. The entire experience felt surreal. She recalled how Drogon had been feisty from the start, biting at her hand as soon as he could. This hatchling seemed calmer, more introspective, though that could change once it found its feet fully. An hour later, she heard commotion near the camp's perimeter. One of the scouting parties had returned prematurely, and a worried murmur spread among the men. Daenerys strode over to find Jorah and Grey Worm confronting 3 Unsullied who were panting from exertion. One of them dropped to a knee, saluting. "Your Grace," he began, breath ragged. "We tried to climb the north slope. Halfway up, the rock crumbled beneath us. Pockets of loose stone, possibly from a recent rock slide. A few men nearly fell to their deaths. We retreated before we lost anyone. That route is too unstable." Never. Daenerys' heart sank a little. She glanced at Jorah, who looked grim. "So we have to keep going west through the canyon," she said. "The water's path might lead us to an exit." Grey Worm spoke next, voice stoic but unwavering. "We sent the other party that way. They have not yet returned. We can wait or follow." Daenerys considered. Waiting might be prudent, but if the second party had encountered trouble, she did not want to linger too long. She glanced at the men, saw how their faces gleamed with sweat, and noticed dust streaked their arms. She pictured the precarious climb, how a single misstep could end in disaster. Yet forging blindly into the deeper canyon also posed risk. If bandits or predators lurked, she looked to Jorah. "Take 10 of the Unsullied and go after the second party. If you find a safe path, send word. If you find an ambush, fall back and we'll prepare to fight." He agreed, strapping on his gauntlets with practiced efficiency. Grey Worm prepared to accompany him, but Daenerys gently placed a hand on his shoulder. "Stay here with me, Grey Worm. Keep watch on the camp and on the newborn. If something happens, I'll need your leadership." "Din." Grey Worm bowed, a subtle flicker of relief passing over his stern features. He likely did not fear combat, but the unknown dangers of the canyon made a cautious approach wise. Jorah, however, was used to venturing into hazards on her behalf. Within minutes, Jorah and 10 Unsullied had gathered minimal supplies and set off westward along the stream, disappearing around a bend in the canyon's wall. Their footfalls faded, replaced by the gentle rush of water. Left behind, Daenerys tried to quell her apprehension. She busied herself checking the supplies, ensuring the horses were watered, conferring with Missandei about rations. She peered in on the hatchling from time to time, finding it still dozing. Eventually, the young dragon stirred enough to chirp softly, and she fed it another piece of raw fish. It ate greedily, then crawled into her lap, tucking its wings around its body. She sat on the ground, letting it curl against her warmth. Some men nearby gawked, but none dared approach without permission. She could feel their astonished eyes, their hushed whispers. Another dragon by the 7. She pretended not to notice, stroking the hatchling's ridged spine. The creature nibbled at her fingers in a clumsy gesture, not biting hard enough to break skin. Its eyes met hers, those pale irises reflecting her face back at her. She felt a pang of emotion. Once again, she sensed that intangible otherness, as though the hatchling's gaze reached beyond her. Before she could dwell on it, the dragon yawned, revealing a slender, forked tongue and neat rows of needle-sharp teeth. Then it sank into a half-doze, lulled by her heartbeat. Time crawled. The sun rose higher, shining down into the canyon. The walls warmed, sending waves of dry heat through the basin. Men retreated to the shade, fanning themselves or standing knee-deep in the water to cool off. The horses stamped restlessly, ears flicking at insects. Grey Worm maintained a ring of guards, some posted on ledges overhead, scanning for trouble. Missandei did her best to keep spirits calm, dispensing water and bits of dried fruit. Still, Jorah and his scouting party did not return. Daenerys felt her anxiety blossom. What if they had run into a rock slide? Or hostile strangers? She stood at the water's edge, the newborn dragon in her arms, squinting into the distance. The twisting canyon corridor offered no clear line of sight. The sound of rushing water carried, but no voices or footsteps. She fought the urge to gather the entire camp and set off in pursuit, telling herself that might compound the danger if the path was blocked. 1,000 thoughts warred in her head. She gazed down at the little dragon, which dozed with a tranquility that belied the tension around them. The creature's trust in her was absolute. If only she could muster equal faith in the unknowable path ahead. She let out a slow breath, reminding herself of all the times she had faced adversity. This was simply another challenge, and she was not alone. At last, late in the afternoon, a call echoed from beyond the bend. Grey Worm and several Unsullied snapped to attention. Daenerys clutched the dragon tighter, heart racing. A moment later, shapes appeared at the far side of the basin, Jorah and the rest of the scouting party, marching back at a brisk pace. She hurried forward, relief flooding her. They were unharmed, by the look of it, though dust-covered and tired. She signaled for them to halt near the pool. The men drank eagerly from the cool water, panting from exertion. Jorah approached Daenerys, bowing briefly, eyes flicking to the dragon in her arms. It peered at him, letting out a small hiss, but she soothed it with a touch. Jorah cleared his throat. "We found a path," he announced, voice echoing against the canyon walls. "The stream continues west, then bends south. After some distance there's a break in the canyon wall, a narrow pass that opens onto rolling dunes. It's not large, but it should accommodate the horses if we take care." Many say. Daenerys felt her heart lift. "So we can leave this place?" He nodded. "Yes, but not without caution. There's a cluster of jagged rocks at the exit, likely the remnants of a collapsed arch. We'll need the men to move them or go around a precarious ridge, but it's doable. Once beyond that, the desert stretches out again." She considered swiftly. More open desert might present its own challenges, but at least they wouldn't be hemmed in by cliffs. She realized the urgency. The newborn dragon needed open space eventually, not to mention the entire caravan was at risk if they lingered here too long. "We'll break camp at first light tomorrow," she decided. "We'll travel by cooler hours. For now, let the men rest. Good work." Jorah bowed, relief shining in his eyes. He glanced again at the hatchling, who blinked sleepily. "It grew attached to you quickly, didn't it?" Daenerys stroked the baby dragon's neck. "Yes," she said softly. "And I to it." She knew the day might come when it soared free, possibly forging a bond beyond her understanding. But for now, it was helpless without her. "Have you seen any sign of travelers or bandits along that path?" Jorah shook his head. "No. It's desolate. If anyone else had found that route, there's no trace left now." She thanked him and watched as he went to inform Grey Worm and Missandei. Around her, the men breathed easier, hearing the news that a way out had been secured. Preparations began for a morning departure. Some of the soldiers rummaged for leftover fish or dried meat to eat, determined to fill their bellies before the next long trek. A mood of quiet optimism replaced the earlier gloom. Night fell more swiftly than expected, the sun blocked by the canyon rim. The temperature dropped, forcing the men to gather around fires. Daenerys sat near the largest fire, the baby dragon nestled under a warm blanket at her side. As she nibbled on a piece of salted meat, she watched the flames dance and swirl. Her eyes drifted to the small, glimmering shape, breathing softly in the cradle of her cloak. She remembered the old saying that a Targaryen alone in the world was a terrible thing. But she was no longer alone in her blood. She had living dragons, and now a new one who embodied mysteries she could not fully unravel. Perhaps somewhere in the north, Jon Snow still walked. The memory of him tugged at her unexpectedly, stirring an ache she could not name. She reminded herself that she had chosen her own path, yet a corner of her heart would not let him fade. The night grew deeper, and one by one, the fires burned lower. Men slept in a ring, their forms huddled against the cold. A handful of guards remained alert. Jorah and Grey Worm took turns patrolling the perimeter. Daenerys lingered by the low flames, gazing into the embers, letting her thoughts swirl. She felt the newborn dragon shift, pressing closer to her side. A ghost of a smile curved her lips. If she was forging a new future, she would do it with this small life at her heart. Eventually she rose, cradling the hatchling and returning to her enclosure near the brazier. Missandei offered to sit watch, but Daenerys insisted that her friend rest. Missandei had done so much already. Daenerys settled down, stoking the brazier's coals to provide a comforting glow. The dragon cooed softly, nuzzling her hand. Its eyes, a strange pale gray, reflected the fire's light with a luminous sheen. Daenerys felt as if she were peering into a twilight sky, an endless stretch of dusk. She murmured to the hatchling in Valyrian, telling it stories of the wide world beyond these canyon walls. She spoke of the great grass sea, of Meereen, of Winterfell's stark battlements. The little dragon cocked its head as though listening. In her exhaustion, she fancied it might actually understand. Then she smiled at her own whimsy. Still, dragons were no ordinary beasts. Their intelligence was a flame that glowed from the moment of birth. When her eyelids grew too heavy, she arranged her cloak to cradle the dragon comfortably. It curled up like a cat, tucking its tail around its hind legs. Even sleeping, it radiated warmth, a living ember. Daenerys let her eyes close. The hush of the canyon pressed on her ears, but it was less menacing than before. She could almost believe the whispers in the wind had gone quiet, as if satisfied by the birth of something wondrous. In that lull, she drifted into dream once more. She dreamt of soaring above a moonlit desert, the new dragon grown large enough to carry her. Below, dunes rippled like a silver sea. She felt the thunder of its heartbeat resonate beneath her legs, the power of its wings scattering grains of sand with each downbeat. Clouds parted, revealing a looming shape of a distant fortress wreathed in snow. In the dream, she did not fear the cold. She urged the dragon onward, drawn by a silent call from that icy domain. Wind tore at her hair, howling. The fortress rose out of the gloom, its walls translucent like ice, spires sharp as spears. She heard a voice echo across the night. A single word she could not decipher. Something between a name and a summons. She woke, gasping, disoriented. The brazier had died down, leaving only faint embers. The canyon lay in a hush of pre-dawn twilight. Her heart pounded, a bead of sweat rolling down her temple. She realized the baby dragon was peering up at her, blinking as if sensing her distress. She stroked its neck to soothe it, and to soothe herself. Time to rise. Time to leave this place. She steeled herself, pushing aside the lingering fragments of her dream. She had a caravan to lead, and a new life to protect. They would forge westward, into the desert, and from there, carve out their path. Whether that path led to reuniting with her older dragons, or to discovering new destinies, she did not yet know. But she refused to stand still. Outside, the first bleary movements of the camp began. Men shook off sleep, rolling up blankets, whispering about the day's march. Daenerys tucked the baby dragon into a snug sling Missandei had devised from cloth, leaving her hands mostly free but keeping the creature close. It chirped in faint protest at being jostled, then settled against her warmth. She emerged into the gray morning, cloak wrapped around her shoulders, hair braided back. She felt the swirl of tension and anticipation in the camp's air. Jorah and Grey Worm greeted her with quiet resolve. Missandei hurried to her side, once more all efficiency despite her own fatigue. They would break camp quickly, gather every water skin brimming full, and follow the route west. The baby dragon's presence no longer a secret, though still a hush hung over it, as if none dared speak openly of it in front of Daenerys. She saw awe in the eyes of her soldiers when they glanced at the small shape stirring beneath her cloak. Let them look, she thought. I do not hide my children. An hour later, the company set off, leaving the basin that had served as their temporary haven. They trudged onward through the winding path Jorah had scouted. The canyon walls still towered, but now they angled in a way that let more sunlight slip through. bathing the corridor in morning gold. The hush of night gave way to the rhythmic clop of hooves, the slosh of the stream, the shuffle of boots on gravel. The newborn dragon remained mostly quiet, lulled by the motion. Daenerys occasionally peeked at it, reassured by the slow lift of its tiny chest. As they advanced, they passed through stretches where the canyon narrowed so much that riders had to dismount and lead horses single file. Then it opened again, revealing hidden pockets of dried scrub and twisting side passages that branched away into gloom. Grey Worm kept the Unsullied alert, scanning for potential threats. None emerged. The only companions they had were the murmuring wind and the gentle chuckle of flowing water. By midday, they reached the cluster of fallen rocks that Jorah had described. Sharp boulders littered the path, forming a jagged barrier. Daenerys dismounted and handed her mare's reins to an Unsullied. She approached carefully, mindful that a misstep could break an ankle. The baby dragon stirred, poking its head out from the sling, its nostrils flaring at new scents. Jorah gestured to a slope along the left side. "We can move some of the smaller rocks to clear a path," he said. "Or we can attempt that narrow ledge above. It looks stable enough, but the horses may balk." Daenerys eyed the ledge. It was slender, running at an incline a few feet above the boulder field, wide enough for a single horse at a time if the animal was steady. She weighed the risk of clearing rocks, which might take hours, and risk a collapse, versus trying to coax frightened mounts across a precarious route. The dragon within her sling chirped, as though adding its opinion. She turned to Grey Worm. "How many men do we have who can handle the horses with skill on a narrow path?" He considered. "We have several Dothraki blood riders and some freedmen who were once caravan guides. They can manage it, but it may still be slow." Daenerys nodded, making a quick decision. "We'll try the ledge. Moving these boulders could spark a landslide. Let's not risk it." She turned to address the men at large. "We proceed carefully, one horse at a time, led by a skilled handler. The rest of you, spread out, help guide from below if needed. No sudden noises." The men obeyed, forming a queue. One Dothraki took the lead, urging his horse onto the ledge. The animal's ears went back, hooves clattering on stone, but the Dothraki murmured soothing sounds in their own tongue, and eventually, the horse advanced. Others followed slowly, step by step. Daenerys stood below, watching each precarious crossing with her heart in her throat. The baby dragon craned its neck, eyes bright, as though fascinated by this new vantage of the world. Daenerys made sure it didn't try to squirm free. Time stretched as they moved the entire caravan across. Occasionally a rock tumbled, sending men diving aside or horses snorting in panic. But no one fell, and no avalanche occurred. Daenerys felt relief flood her each time a group reached the other side. Waiting in a safer stretch of canyon, she was among the last to cross, leading her own mare by the bridle while Grey Worm stood at her back, keeping watch. The baby dragon let out a throaty chirp that made the horse flick its ears. Daenerys patted the mare's neck, breathing steadily. They made it across without major incident. Once on the other side, they found the canyon floor sloping gently upward. They trudged on, the sun beating down now that the walls weren't as high. The water curled away into a smaller channel, dwindling. Soon, the heat rose once again, and Daenerys felt sweat trickling down her spine. The baby dragon panted softly, so she shielded it with a fold of her cloak, offering a sip of water if it would take any. It lapped a few drops, though not eagerly. Its metabolism was still new, adjusting to life outside the shell. At last, after a final bend in the canyon, the walls dropped away. The sky expanded in a vast arc of blue, and the ground leveled out into an open desert once more. A wave of hot air greeted them, shimmering across sands that stretched toward the horizon. The caravan paused, and a subdued cheer rose among the men. They might not relish more desert travel, but freedom from the canyon felt like a victory. Daenerys walked out into the open, the baby dragon peering around with wide eyes, as though marveling at the endless, sunlit dunes. Jorah came to her side, pressing a hand against his dusty breeches. "Shall we strike out west until we find another oasis or sign of civilization? According to Darren, there should be a trade route somewhere beyond these dunes." Daenerys nodded. She noticed the men shading their eyes, scanning for any markers. The desert was harsh, but at least it did not confine them in choking rock. "Yes," she said. "Let's keep going until sunset, then make camp in the open. Better to space out and not crowd ourselves." She took a breath. "Thank you, Jorah. You've done well." He dipped his head, a smile ghosting across his face. "All credit to your leadership, Khaleesi." She glanced down at the newborn dragon, thinking of how it had slept peacefully through most of their difficult crossing, content in her arms. A curious mixture of pride and worry pulled at her heart. She wondered if, in time, it would yearn for the skies with the same restless spirit as Drogon, or if it might bond to another. She swallowed the thought for now. Survival came first. Growth and flight would follow when the creature was ready. She ordered the caravan to move, and they spilled out into the desert in a rough column. Sand crunched underfoot, the glare of sunlight reflecting off pale dunes. The wind here tasted different than in the canyon, drier, but oddly more liberating. Daenerys perched atop her mare once more, allowed herself a final glance at the crags behind them. The Whispering Wound had relinquished them at last, but it had not done so without a price. Their energy was spent, their supplies diminished, and she felt certain that place would haunt her dreams for nights to come. Yet from it, she had emerged with a newborn dragon. A secret bond that might reshape her future all over again. As they pressed onward into the dunes, Daenerys lifted her gaze to the blinding sky. The baby dragon, tucked against her chest, let out a curious trill as if calling to the heavens. Daenerys smiled, lifting one hand in a silent gesture of communion. Together, they would face whatever horizons lay ahead. Desert, city, or the rumored winter lands so far to the north that snow blanketed the ground. In the haze of heat, she could almost envision swirling flakes. But for now, the sands claimed them, offering a new and open path. She urged her horse onward, feeling the creature beneath her respond. Missandei rode close by, ensuring the men formed an orderly line. Jorah scouted ahead with Grey Worm. The sun climbed, relentless. But Daenerys found renewed strength in the gentle warmth of the tiny body pressing into her. The hush of the desert was different from the canyon's moans. Wide, expansive, filled with possibility, rather than dread. Perhaps soon, she would discover the dragon's name. Perhaps soon, she would learn why it felt half-bound to something beyond her reach. For now, they journeyed side by side, mother and hatchling, forging deeper into the unknown with heads unbowed. And though the hours were long and the desert unkind, Daenerys carried within her the certainty that a new chapter of her legend had begun. A chapter that would echo across continents, shaped by the gentle breath of the newest dragon in the world.